Greece is a coastline of thought and stone. Islands speak to one another with light hills terrace. The wind courtyards hold a square of sky. We will drift at the pace of lamps and oars, through markets that weigh fairly, ship sheds that keep wood dry, sanctuaries that teach people to arrive together, houses where looms count the day, and stoas where shade becomes a school. No battles tonight, only the small instruments that let a world stay honest. Measures, chords, rings, allotment stones, water clocks, amphora stamps, or looms and door keys. If sleep arrives, let it the Aegean keeps your place. The first part. Stone teaches water to be patient. On slopes that once answered rain with hurry, walls appear in steps, each no taller than a good knee, each laid without boasting. A mason plucks a line tight between two olive stumps. The string hums a note that means true. He sets a header, then a stretcher, then a small wedge that believes in modest corrections. Gaps are not accidents, but invitations to the next stone to behave. Behind the face, rubble settles like a choir that knows its part. When the wall reaches the height the land asked for, he caps it with flat stones that will introduce wine to restraint. A terrace is a conversation with winter. Soil, once restless, now finds it has a seat. Rain arrives not as argument, but as guests called in order. First stones, then gravel, then earth, then roots. A girl walks along the new lip scattering barley with a hand that learned from her grandmother. How far is far enough? The seed answers by being exactly itself. A boy follows with a basket of shards, broken pots, given a second life, dropping them into the drain slit at the terrace back where water will learn to step fine. Anything can be useful when it remembers which way to face. Paths between terraces learn to be kind to feet. Where the slope steepens, steps appear, shallow enough that a donkey will call them reasonable. At the turn, a low curb carries a channel no wider than 2 fingers. The channel spills into a small box lined with lime plaster, then slips out again, thinner, calmer, persuaded. A plumb bobbly drop on a blackened cord checks the fall. A carpenter's eye agrees. The mason wipes plaster with the heel of his hand, then with a damp cloth, smoothing until touch becomes mirror. Later, when light crawls under cloud, the plaster will shine back a sky the color of patience. By the village spring house, stone breathes cool. The cream mouth cut to a curve, a hand can trust lets water into a trough that has learned the sounds of morning. Amphora rims tapping, ladles asking short questions, sandals deciding on confidence. Lion-headed spouts bite nothing but air from their mouths. The overflow falls into a basin where reeds consider whether to be decorations or citizens and choose both. A woman with a jar inspects the lip for chips that would trouble a rope. The rope understands and behaves. On a hook rests a bronze strainer dark with long agreement. She rinses it, holds it to the light, nods, and sets it back to its thoughtfulness. Above the spring, someone tended the slope years ago, and then again last year, and again yesterday. Stone check dams interrupt a gully that once wanted applause for its speed. Now, after rain, water pools behind each low sill, lies down, drops its cargo of hurry, then walks on, a little wiser. A boy and his grandfather clean the first pool with baskets. The boy lifts mud that used to be arrogance. The old man lifts stones that remember last winter's outburst. Both remember to laugh when the basket pretends to be heavier than truth. Work is a game if the land plays too. In courtyards, cistern lids open like careful books. A broom of palm fronds sweeps dust from the seal. A peg pulls a wooden eye. The lid rolls to a stop against a stone that exists only to be gentle. A rope descends, knotted by palms that learned even spacing, and a shoulder jar rides down like a story that has been told before and will be told again. When the jar returns, the woman pours through cloth into a smaller amphora that will live near the doorway. The cloth exerts the quiet authority of clean. A child watches, registers that the jar never scrapes the rim, and will ask someday why. The answer will be because jars and rims remember friendships. On rooftops, terracotta tiles lie in rows like good thoughts. At the eaves, a cymra gutter with a lion mouth invites sudden water to become a stream that knows where to go. A carpenter checks the pitch with a straight edge that does not gossip the slope is enough for rain to become story without becoming headline. Under tiles, a layer of chaff and straw gives summer heat something to talk to while people sleep. A woman reaches up to adjust a tile that had ideas, it changes them when she looks at it correctly. Even a roof can accept instruction. Down the lane, a threshing floor waits, sealed with rolled clay and the weight of many circles. Its raised rim keeps grain from practicing escape. On breezy afternoons, winnowing happens here, always watching which way the valley chooses to think. A man lifts grain with a wide basket and lets wind edit chaff floats to a corner where goats consider philosophy. Grain falls like small decisions onto the right pile. A girl counts with her fingers, and then with her mind numbers become friends when wind is kind. Terraces are for trees as much as for grain. Olives, with feet that enjoy arguments with stone, hold the lip of each bench. Their leaves speak in silver syllables that the hillside has translated for centuries. Between trunks, vines learn rails to poles, and a rope climbing with the stubborn politeness of letters. A pruning knife hangs from a belt by a loop that opens before it argues the man who wears it chooses which shoots get the summer, and which become goat jokes. Choices are easier when they happen every year. When a storm is rumoured, shutters are checked, loops retied, lids weighted, and small stones placed in the mouths of jars that like to rise when they should not. The hillside accepts guests. Wooden stakes driven in at the ends of rows become neighbours with ropes strung taut enough to make a song. The song is not for people, it is for the wind, which cannot resist tuning itself to strings. In the ravine below, yesterday's check dams remember why they exist and practice their courtesy with no applause. The first heavy drops arrive like messengers who remembered to wash their hands. At dusk the spring house breathes a cooler line into the road. Lamps appear in simple brackets, trimmed wicks making triangles that approve of the night. A man washes a mattock, not because metal mines dirt, but because the hand that lifted the mattock would like to forget. He hangs it in a lean-to, where tools nap nose down in a row. Hoe, spade, rake, fork, pruning pole, to baskets. A thin cord runs across their handles and secures at a peg, and would never stop a thief, but it keeps the tools from deciding to leave each other. Habit is a kind of friendship. In a little shed someone calls a workshop. Lime slakes its thirst in a pit. Quick becomes quiet, heat becomes memory. A mason tests a trowel's edge against a scrap of tile, and then against his skin not to cut, to listen. He mixes a small pan of mortar for a stone that asks for glue. Most walls here are dry laid, believing in weight, but sometimes a corner benefits from a word of adhesion. He closes a hairline with mortar like milk, wipes the face with a wet cloth, and grins when the joint chooses to be invisible. Stone likes compliments that look like care. By the path a little shrine lives under fig shade. Its shelf holds 3 pebbles, 1 seashell, 2 knots of straw, a clay lamp, and dignity. Someone on the way back from the terraces sets down a handful of rosemary, moves 1 pebble half a finger to the left, and straightens the lamp's mouth to point away from dust. The small god who sees all this is probably the habit itself. No thunder is required. Toward night the hillside becomes a staircase of dark and darker. A boy climbs to fetch a forgotten tool and stops what he is doing, because the sea's finding the moon again, and the terraces look like talk pages. He decides the stars are alpha stamps on a jar he cannot lift. He will change this metaphor tomorrow, tonight it is enough. He ties the gate at the top of the path with a bow that remembers to open and descends left, right. Small stones underfoot verifying the slope. The drain whispering where it goes. If sleep arrives, let it. Walls will keep their benches drains, will keep their temper roofs, will keep their angle cisterns, will keep their cool spring houses, will keep their voices fields, will keep their wind. The hillside will remember what you taught it today, and forget what you should not have tried. That is how land learns. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A mason's string humming a wedge seated by a tap, a drain slit fed with honest sherds lime-plastered channel shining like lion spouts giving water a mouth, a bronze strainer rinsed and set. Back a check dam holding a pool of patience, a cistern lid rolled to its sleeping stone, a cyma tile with a lion mouth clean, a winnowing basket, and wind deciding together pruning knife lute, and obedient accord across tall handles. A trowel that speaks softly against tile, a shrine shelf with pebbles, and rosemary, a staircase of terraces under a moon searching its reflection. If sleep arrives, let it. Greece keeps your place in slope and stone and water that have decided to behave. The second part. Stone teaches water to be patient. On slopes that once answered rain with hurry, walls appear in steps, each no taller than a good knee, each laid without boasting. A mason plucks a line tight between two olive stumps, the string hums a note that means true. He sets a header, then a stretcher, then a small wedge that believes in modest corrections. Gaps are not accidents, but invitations to the next stone to behave. Behind the face, rubble settles like a choir that knows its parts. When the wall reaches the height the land asked for, he caps it with flat stones that will introduce wine to restraint. A terrace is a conversation with winter. Soil, once restless, now finds it has a seat. Rain arrives not as argument, but as guests called in order. First stones, then gravel, then earth, then roots. A girl walks along the new lip scattering barley with a hand that learned from her grandmother. How far is far enough, the seed answers, by being exactly itself. A boy follows with a basket of shards, broken pots, given a second life, dropping them into the drain slit at the terrace back, where water will learn to step fine. Anything can be useful when it remembers which way to face. Paths between terraces learn to be kind to feet. Where the slope steepens, steps appear, shallow enough that a donkey will call them reasonable. At the turn, a low curb carries a channel no wider than 2 fingers. The channel spills into a small box lined with lime plaster, then slips out again, thinner, calmer, persuaded. A plumb bobbly drop on a blackened cord checks the fall. A carpenter's eye agrees. The mason wipes plaster with the heel of his hand, then with a damp cloth, smoothing until touch becomes mirror. Later, when light crawls under cloud, the plaster will shine back a sky the color of patience. By the village spring house, stone breathes cool. The cream mouth cut to a curve, a hand can trust, lets water into a trough that has learned the sounds of morning. Amphora rims tapping, ladles asking short questions, sandals deciding on confidence. Lion-headed spouts bite nothing but air from their mouths. The overflow falls into a basin where reeds consider whether to be decorations or citizens and choose both. A woman with a jar inspects the lip for chips that would trouble a rope. The rope understands and behaves. On a hook rests a bronze strainer dark with long agreement. She rinses it, holds it to the light, nods, and sets it back to its thoughtfulness. Above the spring, someone tended the slope years ago, and then again last year, and again yesterday. Stone check dams interrupt a gully that once wanted applause for its speed. Now, after rain, water pools behind each low sill, lies down, drops its cargo of hurry, then walks on, a little wiser. A boy and his grandfather clean the first pool with baskets. The boy lifts mud that used to be arrogance. The old man lifts stones that remember last winter's outburst. Both remember to laugh when the basket pretends to be heavier than truth. Work is a game if the land plays too. In courtyards, cistern lids open like careful books. A broom of palm fronds sweeps dust from the seal. A peg pulls a wooden eye. The lid rolls to a stop against a stone that exists only to be gentle. A rope descends, knotted by palms that learned even spacing, and a shoulder jar rides down like a story that has been told before and will be told again. When the jar returns, the woman pours through cloth into a smaller amphora that will live near the doorway. The cloth exerts the quiet authority of clean. A child watches, registers that the jar never scrapes the rim, and will ask someday why. The answer will be because jars and rims remember friendships. On rooftops, terracotta tiles lie in rows like good thoughts. At the eaves, a cyma gutter with a lion mouth invites sudden water to become a stream that knows where to go. A carpenter checks the pitch with a straight edge that does not gossip. The slope is enough for rain to become story without becoming headline. Under tiles, a layer of chaff and straw gives summer heat something to talk to. while people sleep. A woman reaches up to adjust a tile that had ideas. It changes them when she looks at it correctly. Even a roof can accept instruction. Down the lane, a threshing floor waits, sealed with rolled clay and the weight of many circles. Its raised rim keeps grain from practicing escape. On breezy afternoons, winnowing happens here, always watching which way the valley chooses to think. A man lifts grain with a wide basket and lets wind eddy. Chaff floats to a corner where goats consider philosophy. Grain falls like small decisions onto the right pile. A girl counts with her fingers, and then with her mind numbers become friends when wind is kind. Terraces are for trees as much as for grain. Olives, with feet that enjoy arguments with stone, hold the lip of each bench. Their leaves speak in silver syllables that the hillside has translated for centuries. Between trunks, vines learn rails to poles and a rope climbing with the stubborn politeness of letters. A pruning knife hangs from a belt by a loop that opens before it argues. The man who wears it chooses which shoots get the summer and which become goat jokes. Choices are easier when they happen every year. When a storm is rumored, shutters are checked, loops retied, lids weighted, and small stones placed in the mouths of jars that like to rise when they should not. The hillside accepts guests. Wooden stakes driven in at the ends of rows become neighbors with ropes strung taut enough to make a song. The song is not for people, it is for the wind, which cannot resist tuning itself to strings. In the ravine below, yesterday's check dams remember why they exist and practice their courtesy with no applause. The first heavy drops arrive like messengers who remembered to wash their hands. At dusk the spring house breathes a cooler line into the road. Lamps appear in simple brackets, trimmed wicks making triangles that approve of the night. A man washes a mattock, not because metal mines dirt, but because the hand that lifted the mattock would like to forget. He hangs it in a lean-to, where tools nap nose down in a row. Hoe, spade, rake, fork, pruning pole, to baskets. A thin cord runs across their handles and secures at a peg, and would never stop a thief, but it keeps the tools from deciding to leave each other. Habit is a kind of friendship. In a little shed someone calls a workshop. Lime slakes its thirst in a pit. Quick becomes quiet, heat becomes memory. A mason tests a trowel's edge against a scrap of tile, and then against his skin not to cut, to listen. He mixes a small pan of mortar for a stone that asks for glue. Most walls here are dry laid, believing in weight, but sometimes a corner benefits from a word of adhesion. He closes a hairline with mortar like milk, wipes the face with a wet cloth, and grins when the joint chooses to be invisible. Stone likes compliments that look like care. By the path a little shrine lives under fig shade. Its shelf holds 3 pebbles, 1 seashell, 2 knots of straw, a clay lamp, and dignity. Someone on the way back from the terraces sets down a handful of rosemary, moves 1 pebble half a finger to the left, and straightens the lamp's mouth to point away from dust. The small god who sees all this is probably the habit itself. No thunder is required. Toward night the hillside becomes a staircase of dark and darker. A boy climbs to fetch a forgotten tool and stops what he is doing, because the sea's finding the moon again, and the terraces look like taught pages. He decides the stars are alpha stamps on a jar he cannot lift. He will change this metaphor tomorrow, tonight it is enough. He ties the gate at the top of the path with a bow that remembers to open and descends left, right. Small stones underfoot verifying the slope. The drain whispering where it goes. If sleep arrives, let it. Walls will keep their benches, drains will keep their temper, roofs will keep their angle, cisterns will keep their cool spring houses, will keep their voices, fields will keep their wind. The hillside will remember what you taught it today, and forget what you should not have tried. That is how land learns. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A mason's string humming, a wedge seated by a tap, a drain slit fed with honest sherds, lime plastered channel shining like lion spouts giving water a mouth, a bronze strainer rinsed and set. Back a check dam holding a pool of patience, a cistern lid rolled to its sleeping stone, a cyma tile with a lion mouth clean, a winnowing basket, and wind deciding together, pruning knife looped and obedient accord across tall handles. a trowel that speaks softly against tile, a shrine shelf with pebbles, and rosemary, a staircase of terraces under a moon searching its reflection. If sleep arrives, let it. Greece keeps your place in slope and stone and water that have decided to behave. The third part. A house is a courtyard that teaches daylight to behave. Morning enters through the great door and loses its hurry in the square of sky shadows. Step under the colonnade and fold themselves neatly. At the threshold, a broom rests, bristles up, so luck will not lie down too soon. The door bar comes off the hooks. The pin that bored through the jamb yesterday is set aside where hands will find it without thinking. A key shaped like an ant's iron tooth, where the memory of wood hangs from a peg. It does not need to be loud to be certain. On the left, the hearth breathes like a polite animal. Ashes are raked into a low ring. A coal the size of a thought is coaxed awake with a reed. Chips take the lesson, then split sticks, then a short log. Someone holds a clay lamp to the new flame and turns the wick until it agrees to be narrow. The lamp's mouth slightly black at the lip accepts oil from a jug with a spout. The spout tolerates no splashing. A girl sets the lamp on a niche by the household shrine, where a little garland remembers last month's procession. Gratitude here is housekeeping, tidy, regular, a pinch of meal for a Hestia, and for the habit of not going hungry. Under the eaves, a loom stands like a door to a patient afternoon. The warp hangs from a beam, threads combed into order, lease rods holding the grammar of over and under. On each gathering of threads, a smooth stone weight waits with quiet authority. A woman checks the heddle strings, lays the weft shuttle across her palm to measure, and begins. She beats the weft with the sword-shaped beater firm. Not angry, so cloth will remember to be one thing. A child counts the beat 1, 2, to and a breath and drifts into drawing or a wax tablet. Stylus whispering, letter fence after letter fence. A cat patrols the warp edge and decides the tail is best kept still. At the far side of the court, an oven of clay becomes morning. The dome is warmed with a small fire when the vault says yes by color and smell. Embers are pushed aside and rounds of barley dough are laid against the hot floor. A woman pricks each with a twig to keep pride down and come up. The first bread comes free with a sound like a secret that wanted to be told. Kindly steam carries fennel and last year's olive wood. Near the oven, a saddle quern kneels on a pad of woven rush. Grain is fed, then persuaded with a handstone until flour answers. The rhythm is more tied than labor. Shoulders learn the shape of enough. In the corner where coolness lives, to big storage jars Pithoy are sunk to the shoulder. Their rims carry small chips and smooth repairs. Lids sit heavy, with a little pebble on one and a shell on the other, so hands will know which is oil and which is grain without waking the mind. A scoop, turned from olive wood, hangs from a cord tied in the knot that opens before it argues. A boy uncovers the grain and leans over to smell last summer. He straightens the lid the way one fixes a blanket, and the jar becomes content again. Beside them, amphorae stand like polite guests in a row, shoulders stamped on the handles with marks that remember where clay once had a river. Water is a housemate and deserves good manners. A spouted jar sits on a stone ledge. A cup rests upside down, clean and ready. The cistern access in the corner is brushed clear before the wooden lid is turned always forward, never back, because habits matter. A rope tied at regular intervals lowers a shoulder jar. The jar returns cool, and the first mouthful is given to the floor, where dust has opinions. A child watches the way the rope rides the rim, and how the jar never scrapes. Knowledge is often a picture before it is a sentence. Clothing and thread continue the morning's company. Wool carders card against card. The fleece forgets its field and becomes fiber. A spindle whirls from a thigh with an authority that does not raise its voice. The newly spun yarn gathers on the shaft in a beautiful accident that repeats every day. A distaff leans in a corner like a cousin of trees. Dyer's pot small, honest live under a bench. Madder red, well jello, woad blue if the year has been kind, and a jar with alum's quiet bite. The dyer checks water heat with a finger taught by older fingers. Cloth enters the color without drama, so the color may choose to stay. In the and the men's room for guests, the furniture is practical and comfortable. Couches along the walls where woven covers a small brazier waits for charcoal. When evenings grow thoughtful, cups hang on pegs, skylights whose ears remember laughter. A crater that never pours pure, jugs that pour politely. Today, there will be no party. The room keeps the cool and the idea of conversation. On the floor, a mosaic border keeps its pattern, as if guarding a sentence from wandering. Someone dusts it with a feather whisk and leaves the dust nowhere in particular, only not here. Doors inside speak in smaller voices than the door to the street. Latches lift, pegs slide, a bolt whispers. Hinges turn on a little oil taught to accept being used. The women's workroom, the Ganacon lives simple, but not bare. Dowry chests with bronze bands stalls, a basket with mending that is never a reproach. Only a permission, a small lyre with 2 strings tuned for afternoon. A girl sings the part of the song that always sits in the throat like an old friend. A baby sleeps, because babies will sleep when work is honest and voice is low. Time inside a house is a set of kind callings rather than a bell. Light crosses the court to the north bench. The certain hour, a shadow on a column's base, says turn the bread. The cistern's lid remembers to be shut before the salt breeze comes in, and a rooster that lives 3 doors away becomes a legend by being correct most days. In the afternoon, a neighbor knocks with 2 fingers and enters with a small bowl of olives that were meant for sharing. A joke is told about goats that misunderstand fences. The joke is older than either of them and wears well. When heat leans harder, shutters draw the sun into lines. Air moves through reed mat, sandals rest under a bench, thoughts under a hat. A craftsman chooses to tune a door today. He lifts the leaf on a wedge, chalks the high spots, trims a shaving that smells like the tree's school days, and reinstalls until the swing admits grace. He rubs beeswax along the lip where wood kisses wood, and teaches the latch to align. He then sets his tools, adze, chisel, mallet on a cloth, aligns their handles, ties them under a cord, and walks away with the gentle vanity of workmanship that will not need praise to survive. When errands are called for, a basket appears as if by spell. Handles wrapped in cloth, a strap to go across a shoulder, the interior lined with an old cloth that has retired from being distinguished and now enjoys being useful. A shopping list is spoken twice, then once to the child for practice. Coins are counted on a low table with a sensible edge, of pebble places already paid into mind. A cord is tied around the purse with the knot that respects small silver and small hands. The door is pulled to and closed with a bar that feels significant because it truly is. Toward evening, the courtyard hosts water and light equally. Faces and forearms, a rinsed feet learn coolness in a bowl. The day steps off the skin. A lamp is trimmed with a reed. The new flame behaves as if it remembers the household's way. A serving board receives bread, olives, cheese, onions, and a dish of something that decided to dignify itself by not being named. Wine meets water in the right proportion, because pride seldom improves liquids. A father tells a child the story of how jars are fired, how clay closes its ears to water only after it has been shouted at by flame. And the child believes this is how all stubbornness becomes useful. Night asks for locks, not fearfully, just correctly. The street door's iron key is lifted like a promise to the future. Teeth then towards, the lock speaks briefly of its day. Metal meets metal in a sound the house recognizes as belonging. The bar is set on its hooks, the crosspin returns home. The latch cord is left in reach of sleep. In the dark of the court, the square of sky is a well of stars that refuse to be counted by anyone in a hurry. The loom is covered with a cloth, so dust will not think itself welcome. The weights kiss the cloth and do not move. A jar's mouth is tied with a loop that opens before it argues. The cat decides that the threshold is the most philosophical spot and therefore perfect. If sleep arrives, let it. Lamps will keep their triangles. Bread will keep its crumb jars, will keep their call locks, will keep their word looms, will keep their order songs, will keep their to strings time, will keep its shadow. A house is a way of speaking softly to the day until the day understands. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A door bar laid aside where the hand always finds it. A lamp mouth trimmed clean. Pouring a quiet coin of light on a shrine ledge. A warp weighted loom With stone weights a hand could love a beater's edge touching the weft, as if to say stay a saddlequern bowed to work a pithos half buried. Its lid straightened like a blanket, a cistern rope knotted at honest intervals, spindles asleep in a basket. Fred still questioning the world, a door leaf lifted on a wedge. Chalk marks like a map of patience coins, aligned on a table's edge, with a pebble that means done a lie leaning. Where a nap might stop, to listen a key turned and tested for certainty, a square of sky declaring peace. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place in walls that breathe, in clay that keeps its promises, in thread that prefers to belong. The fourth part. The market wakes in shade. Stone benches along the stoa, called the air columns, hold up a roof that understands patience. Flagstones remember 1,000 sandals and refuse to complain. A sweep of sandy races, yesterday's footprints without scolding. Under the colonnade, the agoranomos, the market warden, unwraps a canvas roll and reveals the city's vocabulary for fairness. Bronze cups nested by quiet halves, rods with little scars at the thumb widths that matter, a balance beam with knife edges honed to the idea of level, a chest of weights shaped like small certainties. He sets them out one by one, not to intimidate, but to remind the day that truth has measurements. Merchants lift shutters like eyelids. A fishmonger pours last night's melted ice into the drain, wipes his slab with a cloth that knows brine, and lays out silver bodies in ranks that will argue for freshness without using words. A spice seller opens jars, coriander, cumin, fennel and crushes a pinch to teach the air how to behave. A potter stacks bowls by sizes, the hand can read faster than the eye. A woman arrives with a basket and the list she refuses to write down. Because memory is exercise, she tests a pear with 2 fingers and a regret for pears that did not yet learn sweetness. At the standards table, bronze volumes take their morning oath. The warden sets the half-sec stereo's cup over a level board, dips it into the fountain basin, and draws it out with a rim so full that surface tension becomes a halo. He slides a reed across the top, 1 clean bead falls. He smiles, empties the measure back, then turns to the steely yard. On the beam, stamped mark subtle, honest show, where a sliding weight will name what hangs from the hook. He tests the edge with his thumbnail, light obliges by flashing. A merchant brings his own set, the warden tests them against the chest. The little lion, the almond, the turtle, the leaf. He nods once, a pellet of clay, takes an imprint of today's ring and ties to a cord. The cord goes on the merchant's scale, a badge that means behaves. On a low table, rods of length lie as if asleep. A boy running an errand slows down, because straightness has gravity. He lays his bundle next to a cubic rule, and the rule refuses to discuss opinion. At the rule's end, a notch means enough wood shavings to make a peg at the middle. A scratch means you promised this length. The carver laughs under his breath, trims, and tests again. A string line stretched between 2 pegs hums the single note honesty prefers. At the edge of the square, a stone with holes in tidy ranks waits for a crowd that will not hurry. The clariterion, the allotment stone, a quiet machine of chance. Slots drink thin identity tokens, pinacuon to each channel at the side. A bronze tube holds little balls grown serious, some dark, some light. A hand pulls the lever, a ball drops, the rowit names will step forward to duty. No drama, just a lottery the city trusts because wood, stone, and order have fewer friends than favoritism. A child counts the rows and asks why the holes are scratchy. So the pinakia don't slide, says his uncle. And the child considers friction as a public good. Beyond the stoa, a portico holds a stone basin with a neck and a mouth. A water clock that cannot be bribed. A narrow jet slips out, steady as the morning, into the lower jar when the level reaches a line scratched by a careful nail. The time you thought you owned is over. An orator today, he will argue about flour, not philosophy. Glances at the scratch and finds his verbs. He speaks at the pace a stream agrees with. A scribe scratches notes on a wax tablet to men at the back. Exchange nods like coins that do not wish to be counted loudly. The clepsydra drains a bead, clings the bead, lets go. The next voice begins. In a shop that smells of heat and metal, A money warms dyes the colour of late cherries. Between them, a blank of silver waits to become coin. The upper die shows a horse that has been deciding how to run for 3 generations. The lower shows a head who has agreed to stand still a little longer. The strike is firm, not angry. A halo of flash shows where the metal became story and then called to fact. The money weighs the coin on a balance that trembles as if it were important, because it is. He drops the coin into a jar whose bottom says enough for today and stops when the jar agrees. A baker at the far end stamps his loaves with a little sealer bee, a barley ear, a dolphin, so the city can tell who made today's bread if today's bread should embarrass itself. He prices by weight, not ambition, as Steelyard tells him when pride has made a loaf to Erie, and a bowl of water tells him when the salt forgot its job. He sweeps the stones before his stall so mouths can meet bread without dust, and he saves a rough heel for the dog that is teaching the square how to sleep well among feet. A rope maker in the shade of a plane tree pulls hemp through a tar bath that is less an argument and more a conversation. He twists strands into lays and lays into rope, watching the fibers choose to belong. He tests the new line on a ring set in the stowa's step. The ring listens and answers with a small iron song. A fisherman arrives with a basket of old lines and a face that admits both salt and time. The rope maker spices new into old, with a tuck that sailors recognize and accounts with a tally stick a child could defend. The Agra is a school that keeps its voice down. Under the stoa, a philosopher and a potter share a bench. The potter's hands are mapped like a coastline. The philosophers are clean with ink stains. Both drink water. They watch a magistrate weigh a dispute with the same scale the fishmonger uses. Fairness, the potter says, is a board planed flat. Fairness, the philosopher says, is a word that needs a place to stand. They agree to disagree by laughing until agreement shows up anyway. From time to time, the market warden moves like a shadow of certainty. He watches a hand pour grain into a scoop with an angle that is generous to the seller. He taps the scoop and the grain settles to a truth both accept. He sees a scale where the point does not kiss the pointer at 0. He loosens a screw by a breath and the pointer learns humility. He breaks a jar that lied about its volume quietly behind the stall, and the shard goes into the drain where useful fictions belong. He stamps a new measure with a ring that shows a small owl. The owl keeps secrets only from thieves. Near the fountain, a bench carries oddments the day forgot. A folded cord with knots tied at honest distances, a peg whose head is cut to a gentle slope, a shard with a mark that once meant paid, a reed pen that learned to sharpen itself, a bit of lead for plumb bobs, a coin bent so badly it retired to memory. To boys play at court, one pours from a jar while the other speaks about figs. The court ends when the jar is empty. Both are satisfied that justice was served, and both have learned something about the speed of voices. On the edge of the square, a woman sits with a basket of allotment stones, smooth pebbles rubbed into consent. Citizens will draw them from a jar in the afternoon, so that panels and tasks go to hands that did not plan to receive them. She weighs a handful, sifts out the 2 light stones that would let fingers cheat, and adds sturdier ones from a bowl at her feet. Fairness is a weight in the hand before it is an idea in the mind. She eats an olive and saves the pit to teach a child how kidneys look when carved from wood. The sun leans, shade comes longer. The steelyards rest on hooks. Bronze cups return to their nests with a faint remark that means tomorrow. The clariterion swallows the last token and learns it will sleep. The clepsydra is emptied, and wipe the money covers the dies with a cloth that forgives heat. The market warden wipes the knife edges on the balance and smiles at the feeling. A blade sharp enough to split a lie at a public blessing. He ties the chest with a cord and presses a pellet of clay. The clay accepts the owl with dignity and goes hard while no one is watching. If sleep arrives, let it. Scales will keep their level measures, will keep their rims rods, will keep their thumb widths. Water clocks will keep their line cords, will keep their knots tokens, will keep their scratches rings, will keep their owls. A square is fair not by speeches, but by small instruments that choose to be exact. Pocket pictures to carry forward, Bronze cups nested like the grammar of enough, a balance beam glinting along a knife edge, a steel yards, siding weight kissing a mark, a chest of weights, shaped like animals and leaves a clariterian's tidy holes with a child's finger learning friction, a clepsydra's lip with one last bead, letting go a coin fresh from the die showing a horse that runs only on silver, a baker's loaf stamped with a dolphin that promises tomorrow, a rope splice tucked until it forgets it was ever to, a magistrate adjusting a screw the wider than a breath, a cord tied around a standard's chest with a pellet that has learned an owl to boys pouring water into justice and giggling when justice runs out. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place in shade and measure, in length and level, in time that flows exactly as far as it should, and then stops. The fifth part. A harbour learns to sleep standing up, along the curve of the shore. Stone piers reach into water that has learned manners behind them. Long narrow sheds nary face the north wind that keeps wood honest. Their roofs run in sober ranks, their stone thresholds end in slippery rails that slide under the sea like sentences that do not need to raise their voice. At first light, doors open tall and simple. A hull, dry and drowsy, rests in a cradle, its planks thin, many. Obedient remember the shape of speed, its ribs agree without ceremony. A long rope, tar dark and respectable, runs the length of the ship inside. Snug as a belt the high posma that keeps ambition from becoming fracture. A ship is a promise tied in place. Pitch returns to work before the day grows warm. A boy brings the pot. Black as a good secret, a brush whispers along seams where oakum sits like modest wisdom. The master caulker taps with the small hammer that tells truth without judgment. The seam takes it, the plank answers, and the hull hums a note a carpenter can hear through bone. To men slide their hands along the whale, where oars will learn to live, their palms feel for splinters that would become stories later. A basket of leather, all buttons, weights, round collars that will keep oars from wandering. A bowl of tallow shares its patience on every thole pin. Nothing squeaks that has been spoken to kindly. Along the shed wall, tools gather like a vocabulary. Adzes with mouths that shape refusal into agreement, long drills that turn a point into a path, reach straight edges that do not flatter, chalk lines that hum the idea of fair. A carpenter checks a scarf joint where to timbers become one word. He planes until the shadow on the seam disappears, then passes his palm over the place as if to bless both timber and temper. On a bench lies a cleat that remembers where a hand will want it. He rounds the corner a breath more, so rope will age with grace. Hardware is just forethought turned into wood. Outside, masts lean on trestles like patient lances. Sailcloth, woven of flax that once listened to rain, lies folded under a weighted board, so it will forget its creases before the wind remembers it. A woman at the sailmaker's table marks a line with charcoal, and a straight edge made from a door's good truth. She pricks holes along the hem at intervals. The eye learns quickly, a palm needle pulls wax thread through with a noise. That means durable. On the next bench, a braille ring drinks the end of a rope. The rigger spices it with a tuck that makes rope think it was always this way. Sheets, braces, halyards, brails, each named not to complicate, but to keep friends from being confused in weather. Oars rest arranged as sense would have them, longest where arms like a long day, shortest where a boy might keep time with a small pride. Handle ends sleep under an awning, blades lean like leaves against the shed's posts. A leather sleeve guards each loom where it will kiss the thole. A fresh cord for a stop knob waits to keep each oar from wandering too far out of love. The cox, who counts not to command but to knit, oils the little mallet that will set the cadence with wood on wood. He tests 3 tempos with a knuckle on a plank, and the plank replies that none are wrong. One is right for this morning's river. Rowing is weaving, the channel will become cloth. By the quay, anchors sit indifferent and heavy, iron flukes resting in ways carved by yesterday's patience. A boy dragged them a finger's width farther from the edge, so they would never teach a foot to swim against its will. A basket of lead sounders, their bellies marked with little crotchet cups, waits for tallow that will bring up what lives on the bottom. Shell if the anchorage is kind. Grit if caution belongs here. A sailor smears the tallow lowers the plummet, and counts by breath. The line slackens, and the anchor smiles in its sleep. He wipes the tallow with a strip of linen, taught to tell truth to eyes. In the chandler is cool shade. Fittings become verbs. Parallel strings of wooden beads will move the yard, without complaint. A bucket of pegs, each with a slope that explains itself to a mallet, will hold sail where wind wants an excuse to argue. A tub of tar warms in the doorway. Its smell is the smell of vows. The owner of this shop has a hand that weighs rope, if it were coin, and a memory for who prefers 3 strand to 4. He ties each coil from the inside, so it will pay out bravely. And he never sells a line without teaching the knots that will keep it from climbing back aboard at the wrong time. Toward noon, the shed men roll a hole to the rail. The cradle slides on greased timbers. Wedges answer wedges. Blocks say please and get their way. A whistle means no hurry. A whistle means now neither is sharp. The keel meets the wet with a sigh you feel more than hear. 2 poles with forks at their ends cradle the mast and help it remember its step. The step receives it with a wood-on-wood conversation that ends in gratitude. The rigger leads halyard, and Sheeta boy follows with a coil like a pet. He is teaching manners too. The yard rises, the sail blooms brails, teach it to be shy, until asked to be bold. The harbour clerk appears with a tablet tied in a loop. He reads what the clay remembers. A cove to the east where figs are honest. A point to the west where the wind forgets itself for an hour. A prohibition on loudness in the channel. A fee that pays for the ring he is leaning on. He presses today's pellet of clay on the stopper cord with a seal that shows a bird who minds fish. The seal nods that all is well. The loop opens before it argues. The skipper scratches on a scrap of wood the names of 2 harbours and the kind of wind that makes them cousins. This scrap will serve until it forgets, and then become kindling with no insult taken. In the afternoon heat, sailors practice what hands must do together. The cox taps, all slide out leather kisses, wood blades rest a thumb above the water. Out, he says, but softly, a word that means more welcome than command. The stroke makes the first small promise. 12 oars accept it. 16 more assent. The boat moves not by strength but by consent. On the second length, the cox counts to a rhythm that would behave in a weaving room. 1 and 2 and rest and 2 and 1. The water allows it. The hull hums a gull riding a nearby eddy, revises his opinion of humanity. Sweat becomes salt, then dries. No one boasts at a practice that belongs to tomorrow's weather. Navigation here is not heroism, only conversation with reliable things. The sun says east and west kindly twice a day. A small backstaff, simple as a hand shadow, confirms what ankles felt when they stood on the shore. At night the islanders talk to a pale smudge where the milky road walks, and to bright companions who take their turns. A helmsman lines a notch on a headland with a notch in the mast and decides the channel is doing what it promised. If cloud threatens, a lead line tells truth in syllables the hand can hear. There is a shrine near the point with weathered oars crossed under a little roof, the kind of faith that is mostly respect for instructions at work. Evening draws the harbour into decent whispers. Boats rub their fenders along stone that's against a doorway. A line sings on a ring and rests satisfied. A yard comes down, as if it had always intended to. A sail gathers into clues and is bound with 3 turns that keep both dignity and airflow for dawn. Men rinse salt from all looms and leather sleeves. Tallow receives its brush. The brush accepts its day without becoming important about it. A boy who carried wedges returns them to a slot they call theirs. The slot accepts the wedges without praise or sigh. Shops fold their days into the quiet kind of order that needs no witness. The piers speak in iron and rope and water. A woman crosses with a basket of spare buttons for tunics that hate to fail. She trades for a length of cord with a loop already tied. A fisherman's wife leaves 2 small jars of oil, 1 for lamps, 1 for chaff, and takes from the chandlery a peg her door has been asking for. News moves with the softness of lamp smoke. A storm rumoured 3 coves away is not for us. The tax collector learned to stop counting flour by handful and started weighing flour by weight. The baker thinks his new seal gives a loaf good manners. The harbour approves. The sea does not answer, it never needs to. Night returns the sheds to their grandeur. Doors shut with the humility of big doors. that no noise adds, no strength bars go into slots cut to the honesty of a carpenter's rule. A peg slides into a hole that would rather be a peg's hole than anything else. A watchman checks the lashings onto skids where resin has been speaking all day. He tastes water from a jar that lives in a shadow and finds it correct. He ties his lantern to a ring at eye level and walks the quay where rings and cleats have taught the moon to be specific. A dog, whose job title is dog, patrols and decides nothing needs to be said aloud. If sleep arrives, let it. Sheds will keep their straightness, planks will keep their seams, ropes will keep their lay leather, will keep its kindness, anchors will keep their quiet sails, will keep their fold oars, will keep the promise of morning. The sea will keep its level, the wind its temper, the stars their appointments, and habit will keep everything else. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A tar dark hyposma lying along a hole, a vow, a corking mallet whispering a seam into good behavior, a leather all button, and a tholping glossed with tallow, a sailmaker's palm pushing waxed. Thread through flax, a braille ring swallowing a splice that decided to belong, a lead plummet with tallow bringing up a testimony of shells, parrels like wooden beads, ready to make the yard polite, anchors asleep. Iron honest against stone, a yard lowered into arms that know how to carry weight without posing, a coil tied from the inside so it will pay out with manners, a shrine with two weathered oars under a roof too small to brag doors of. The nary appalled too, massive but modest. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place on water that has been taught, in wood that has been persuaded, among tools that mean every word they say. The sixth part. A sanctuary is a tidy hill that teaches hope to stand in line. Cypress holds the wind in thin green hands. Gravel walks declare that feet are welcome, but must be quiet. A low wall keeps goats from practicing theology. At the gate, a basin on a lion-footed pedestal. Peranterian waits for water that has learned to behave. A priest lifts a jug, pours a clean thread, and sets a sprig of bay across the lip. People touch the water with 2 fingers, touch brow and breath, and leave the day's dust where water knows what to do with it. The altar is older than most of the people present and simpler than any of their stories. Ash remembers 1,000 correct burnings. A lip of stone, rubbed by years of careful sleeves, catches fat before it can become ambition. The keeper scrapes last night into the ash pit with a bronze blade shaped like a good sentence and sifts 4 embers that would enjoy being trouble. Nothing glows. He lays split wood like letters on a line, adds twigs that agree to start conversations, and waits without frowning. Fires a colleague, not a spectacle. On the Temeno's edge, small treasuries keep small promises. Their doors are honest wood, their locks are iron, with a better memory than most gossip. Inside are boxes of first fruits and tidy rings of corded offerings. A pair of sandals whose work is over. A child's toy that retired nobly. A sprig of bronze shaped like an ear that no longer needs help. A clay rooster who sings only as far as clay permits. The treasurer enters with a tablet tied in a loop. He lifts each box, weighs it in the hand, writes one soft line of thanks, and turns the key with a patience that belongs to keys. Clay pellets take today's seal quietly and go hard while conversation moves on. Across the court, a fountain house keeps the day from forgetting water. Its lip is cool, a channel in the pavement shows where excess goes. A cup sits upside down to announce its cleanliness. To women rinse grapes that think highly of themselves. A boy refills the jug that will be heavy only until it is set down. A stranger whose sandals admit a long road drinks and does not leave at once. He watches a little procession assemble like a sentence. A boy with a lamp, a girl with a basket of barley, a man with a pitcher that refuses to slop, a priest with a bay branch and a face that does not confuse kindness with softness. The procession moves at the pace of the day's breath. The lamp does not flare, the barley does not spill, the pitcher does not doubt its lip. At the altar a circle is warped, that the ground remembers. Barley scatters like small assurances. Wine pours sideways and forward, never back, so the libation will not feel questioned. A thin sliver of meat meets flame and speaks a quiet syllable. Smoke rises without bragging. A child asks her mother whether gods like stew. They like procedure, the mother says, which is a kind way to say that people like remembering how to do things together. Beyond the altar, a stoa offers shade and the possibility of talking without breaking anything. Along the wall, tablets hang by cords, polite inventories of favors asked and favors returned, little marble receipts for gratitude. No one reads them aloud, they are a background hum like bees in time. A physician attached to the sanctuary checks the pressure in a bandage, nods, and shows a boy how to keep a thorn point moving away from skin rather than into it. Healing is often craft before it is mystery. Down the slope, the theatre faces a piece of sky it has befriended. The coil and those wide stone benches remember many afternoons when listening was the main expenditure. A rigger checks the shade awning ropes where they meet rings set under the cornice. The rings accept a little tallow, and the ropes forgive last year's sun. Stage hands, or priests of reality in their own right, lay planks across the orchestra's edge to make a track that will not trip dancers. A masked chorus hums to notes and finds the third together. In a corner, a flute player warms his breath with scales that smell faintly of olive wood and something like discipline. Tickets here are not shouts, they are tokens that respect order. A basket of lead cymbal halves that match halves sits near the entry. A doorkeeper with a cord around his waist pairs pieces and waves people along to seats marked by rows and wedges. He carries a short rod to point, not to push. His other hand has learned to accept coins politely and to return a small joy in change. A child tries the mask with a long mouth and decides to prefer the one that looks like a wise uncle. The mask maker smiles with professional modesty and adjusts a strap so it will not speak to skin more than it needs to. Around the back of the SKN, carpenters are quiet about doing clever things. A pin loosens, a brace is tapped, a painted panel slides into place with the shyness of good joinery. A wheeled platform that once tried to squeak now glides because someone taught its axle humility with a drop of oil and a strip of leather. On a pegboard, tools hang by shapes that know their hooks adds, that fits only its adds, chisel that rests in a chisel's shadow. The foreman runs a hand along the top rail to find a splinter that had ambitions and persuades it to retire. Festival means food as much as song. In a tent along the path, a woman spreads cloth on low boards. Bowls of olives, cheese, figs, and bread appear with a matter-of-fact grace. A jug holds wine, and a pitcher holds water, and neither argues about proportion. Children bring cups to elders. First someone thanks the shade. By noticing it, someone fixes a stool with a wedge that was waiting in a pocket for its moment of heroism. Across the way, a man checks the portable scale he uses when selling nuts. He tests the balance against a standard weight and grins when the pointer's eye politely returns to zero. He kisses the weight, because why not? As the sun leans, the sanctuary breathes in and out with slower lungs. The afternoon sacrifice is smaller and more exact. The priest's hand makes a sign that is more habit than symbol. A dove lands, decides it prefers the fountain's lip, and drinks the way doves do, not because it knows theology, but because it trusts stone. The treasurer returns one small offering to the family that asked him to, because it was given in a hurry, and generosity should never be mistaken for a contract. A runner leaves with a cord-wrapped roll of notices for the next hill town's assembly. He ties the roll with a loop that opens before it argues. Toward evening, the theatre shows what can happen when people consent to listen at the same time. The chorus steps in and makes a line that breathes as one animal. The flutist finds a pitch that respects stone. The actor speaks into the cup of air the theatre learned to hold long ago. A child falls asleep on her mother's lap halfway through a speech about ships and wakes to a dance about jars. The mother has not moved. The child has only changed her agreement with gravity. The sun withdraws like a guest who does not want to be rude. The first stars try the sky softly. The mask maker hangs his masks on a rail so they will forget the day and be ready to be anyone tomorrow. At night, the sanctuary becomes its own hush. Lamps sit in niches like patient birds. The fountain turns to black silk. The altar keeps the memory of warmth without keeping the warmth. The gate is bar and pin sure. A cord seals the treasury with a pellet the owl approves. A dog considers chasing a morph and consents to be reasonable. Cypress stands straighter. The ground, which has learned a great deal today about people, rests. If sleep arrives, let it. Basins will keep their cool altars, will keep their ash-lipped treasuries, will keep their locks tokens, will keep their matches ropes, will keep their gentle work masks, will keep their straps benches, will keep their curved songs, will keep their breath. Festivals are not noise, they are choreography of care. Ordinary things arranged so meaning can sit down. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A parantarian with bay across its lip ash on an altar comb to quiet a treasurer's key turning low, and certain a chord seal taking an owl, without fuss fountain cup upside down in clean shade. Awning lines fed through rings, with a fingertip of tallow, a pegboard of tools, where each shadow fits only one tool, a lead token matching its mate in a doorkeeper's palm, a mask strap adjusted until it forgets to annoy a portable. Scale blinking its pointer to zero wedges, doing hero work, under a stall, a chorus in a single breath, a gate barred with a thought for morning. If sleep arrives, let it. Greece keeps your place in sanctuary and shade, in seats that listen, in songs that prefer comprehension to applause. The seventh part. A road is a calm idea that keeps going. It rises out of the last house and learns to hold a shape, a crown to shed water. Ditches that prefer honesty, stones tamped until foot, and will choose to agree. At the edge of the village, a boundary marker square, patience stands at shoulder height. Someone has rubbed its corners smooth, with years of greeting. A sprig of rosemary dries in a crack. One will admit to placing. The marker is less about law than about courtesy. Here is where one kind of care ends and another begins. Morning sets the work for distance. To men with baskets and tampers, kneel at a wet patch that tried to become a story they rake, add gravel, tamp, and then listen with their palms for that low note that means enough. A third scrapes the side ditch open, where last winter's leaves tried to amend the plan. On the slope ahead, a short culvert stone route, flayed over a water stubborn as a mule tells the flow to go under the road instead of over it. A child throws a pebble in and watches it vanish, then reappear with calmer opinions downstream. He nods. The road nods back, where a gully slices the hillside. A small bridge chooses clarity. To cut waters lean upstream, old men who know where the stones are laid with their long sides across the span, so the arch will prefer wholeness. The parapet is knee-high, saying notice me, but do not fear. A mason runs a finger along a mortar line and wipes away what does not need to exist. At either end, a flat stone makes a threshold, so wheels will learn to step rather than stumble. A bell hangs from a peg for fog, no one rings it today. Good days are when instruments rest. A ferryman keeps a rope across the river, where the bridge would cause too much patience. The rope rides onto posts capped with bronze, that minds rain. A little roller asks the rope to forgive friction. The ferry planks well caught, sides modest slides along as the rope passes hand to hand. A cart rolls aboard and stops against a timber that has learned exactly this weight. A woman with a jar steps aboard and does not slash. A boy stares at the iron ring on the landing, and then at the way the rope ties, and then at the way it unties. On the far side, the ferryman takes a coin, weighs it in his palm, and drops it in a leather cup that never tells stories out of school. Milestones stand at their opinions without arguing. They do not boast distances aloud, they simply say, with the quiet of stone, that many people have already believed this direction. A cairn on a ridge offers a small vocabulary for wind, flat stones, a piece of driftwood, the worn sole from a sandal that decided to be a sign. Below, the road shows wheel ruts, where carts agreed on path over many seasons in rain. Puddles gather inside the ruts and admire the sky. Between ruts, a spine of gravel keeps feet dry. Shoes thank the spine by wearing it just enough to keep it interested. At a crossroads, a herm watches without blinking. Its base is whitewashed against forgetfulness. Its top carries a quiet face that neither smiles nor frowns, because judgment is not its job. A little shelf holds for pebbles, a bit of shell, a loop of cord, and a tiny clay lamp with a mouth that remembers more fire than it will ever need again. Travelers touch the base, touch their foreheads, and leave whatever can stand for attention. A peddler leaves a knotty tied well this morning. A soldier leaves nothing and whispers something between his breath and the horizon. The road allows both. Midday finds the relay post humming without hurry. A pandishane an inn with a yard, and a gate that prefers to be tied rather than shut off as shade. In the corner, a trough and a stone for rubbing backs invite animals to forget their loads. A boy brings a bucket under politeness. Under the eaves, tack hangs in a grammar of loops, halters with rope noses, bridles with soft mouthpieces, panniers that sit like to baskets who have learned to agree. A farrier opens a box of nails that glint like good intentions. He lifts a hoof, rasps until the horn says yes, places the shoe like a sentence that will stand, and clinches the nails down with the persuasion of a tool that already knows the answer. In the shade across the yard, a wheelwright practices patience. A hub waits on a low block spoke stand in a circle. A class called to order fellow segments lie like ribs of a boat. He fits spokes to hub, then fellows to spokes, checking that each tongue sits in its groove as if born there. To men heat an iron tire until it admits being larger than its nature. They run with tongues and drop the ring over the wheel. Water hisses, steam approves. The iron shrinks, closes its hands around wood, and promises to remember. The wheelwright turns the wheel, listens, and is pleased not because the wheel speaks, but because it does not. The road carries news more than noise. A courier arrives with a cord-wrapped packet sealed by clay. The seal bears a bird that could be anyone's cousin. The innkeeper who checks the seal's edge for mischief nods and trades the packet for another with a different bird and the same integrity. He notes the exchange on a wax tablet and pushes the stylus into the groove for today later. A scribe will transfer it to something that enjoys being permanent. The courier drinks, tears a piece of bread, ties his sandals, and goes. Distance is just a way of moving habits into other valleys. Along the verges, work travels in the opposite direction. A shepherd eases his flock along the ditch, so hooves will reduce the new growth into scents. The road applauds softly by holding shape. A pair of women carry a pole between them with baskets hung low. One basket smells faintly of thyme, and the other of something that makes children guess. They step together without practice because the pole taught them years ago. At intervals, flat stones set level become benches for people who have not yet decided which way to prefer. A man with a lyre sits and adjusts one string until it agrees with air. By late afternoon, heat argues less. A small causeway crosses a marsh where reeds consider philosophy. The road rides on a mattress of brush and stone that men placed when the marsh thought it could persuade. The road remembers and does not discuss. A pair of cutouts let water breathe from one side to the other. A plank sits over each hole so carts will not think too hard. A dragonfly practices a lesson in staying exactly where it is. While moving forward, the road graduates it with honors. In the distance, a hill town hangs its roofs from a ridge like teeth from a smile that forgot to be vain. Back at the relay, evening prepares nothing dramatic. Lamps in the yard learn to be small suns. A pot on a low hearth performs kindness for bread, and beans a jar of pickled things continues its studies in patience. Animals shift weight and decide joints are correct. A traveler rubs dust from an ankle and removes a pebble with the gratitude of someone who has met worse pebbles. The innkeeper locks nothing that does not need to be locked and ties everything else with a loop that opens before it argues. Coins move from one palm to another with the exactness of scales. In a market, trust sits on the bench of the man who has already eaten. Night makes the road disappear without taking it away. Stars open where roof tiles would be if the world were indoors. The ferry rope darkens to a line. The eye can walk if it must. The bridge and the culvert keep doing what they do, whether anyone watches or not. A fox crosses at an angle that makes no sense to people. He has a different map. The boundary marker becomes a silhouette that knows your height. The cairn thinks of wind and considers adding something to itself tomorrow, then forgets. The herm does not blink. A dog in the yard sleeps beside a shoe and dreams that the road taught it a new trick it did not. but the dog will thank the road anyway. If sleep arrives, let it. Crowns will keep their water ditches, will keep their shaped culverts, will keep their secret agreements bridges, will keep their parapets ferries, will keep their ropes milestones, will keep their stance arms, will keep their silence. Inns will keep their shade wheels, will keep their round cords, will keep their seals. Distance will keep being soluble in footsteps, and hooves and the small plans of people who do not wish to shout. Pocket pitchers to carry forward. A tamper finding the low note of enough, a culvert swallowing a pebble and returning it later. With better manners, a bridge parapet-sized 4 knees, a ferry rope with hitting a bronze-capped poster. Milestone with corners polished by greetings, a herm's little shelf of pebble, shell, loop, and lamp, a yard gate tied with a loop that opens before it argues, a hoof rasp singing on horn, an iron tire steaming down to embrace with a wax tablet with 1 groove for today. A causeway over reeds, behaving like a matrasser. Bench stone holding to baskets that smell like time and guesswork. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place in the long kindness of roads, where small instruments, stones, ropes, rings, loops carry people farther than speeches ever could. The 8th part. The hillside is a conversation between stones and roots. Dry laid terraces step the slope into sense, each wall leans a little into the hill, the way a shoulder leans into a friend. Between olives, soil sleeps under straw to keep winter's memory in spring. Green wakes and keeps what rain would rather take. A path runs along the contour like a kind sentence. At its bend, a low shrine with a clay lamp shows black at the lip, and none of the urgency of cities. Morning, and the nets come out folded like good advice. To people walk the rows with poles tipped in padded cloth. They tap each branch with the vocabulary of respect. And fruit lets go as if remembering an appointment. Olives land on nets and sound like a small rain. A third worker picks by hand what will be oil for lamps rather than for bread, because lamp oil forgives more. Children roll the edges of the nets and tip fruit into baskets that are neither a burden nor a boast. A donkey, who knows the geometry of slopes better than anyone, waits in a patch of shade and considers the future of thistles. At the press house the roof is high and honest air moves, flyers are invited to go elsewhere. The beam stands like a thought the village keeps returning to. Its far end wears a collar of stone and rope, a screw as wide as a man's arm and twice as patient, turns down into a stack of woven mats, the strop eye filled with crushed olives. A boy brings hot water in a jug to coax the last kindness from the paste. A man pours it carefully around the edges so the mats will not soak. Under the beam, a spout leads into a settling pond. Oil rises, water lowers itself, and the first pale green decides to become clear. Someone skims with a ladle that knows the difference between haste and timing. The press speaks in wood, rope, and gravity. To men, add stones to the weight cradle. The beam bows with dignity. The screw advances by half turns. You can count with your breath. The rope creaks at a pitch that means correct. On the floor, crushed pits in a basket wait to become fuel for winter, or bedding for a path that dislikes mud. A girl kneels beside the settling pan and watches the line between water and oil sharpen, then softens it again with a stir to let more decide. Near the door, a pithos is sunk to the shoulder. Its inside is glossed with a breath of pitch that will respect flavour and keep air from rehearsing trouble. Jars gather, amphory stand in a polite army, belly to belly, necks tall enough to wear their little clay stoppers like hats. On each neck, a faint incision. The capacity line waits for the moment when enough becomes a measure, not a mood. A seal pellet of clay will be pressed later with a ring that shows a sprig, a bee, or a dolphin, depending on who is responsible. A scribe at a cedar board writes on a wax tablet, hill name, row, date, and whether the trees behaved. He warms the tablet in the sun for a breath to smooth yesterday's impatience, then scores today's facts into it like a lullaby. Where the slope meets a level shoulder, a round threshing floor lies stonier than the rest of the world. Later in the year, barley will visit today. The floor empties its coolness into the air. A farmer walks the rim and checks a flagstone that has argued upward. He taps it down with a mallet that understands how to say please. He looks toward the low wall where wind comes up in the afternoon, because wind is the other half of winnowing. He lifts his hand to feel the air and chooses to think it will behave. It usually does. Water on a hill is a lesson with steps. A header channel uphill feeds little wooden sluice gates that slide into slots cut in stone. A gate is lifted with 2 fingers and the smallest ambition in the world. Water threads along rills that where the patience of many springs, it settles in a small cistern under a flagstone lift with a hook. A woman clears the rill with a hand broom made of last year's. Read she leaves a little grit, so the water remembers not to run too fast. In the lowest terrace, a clay pipe to lengths with a collar carries surplus into a catchment pit where frogs practice moderation. Between rows, bees live in clay hives stacked like amphorae that forgot their handles. Each hive is a clay tube with a disc at the back and a door at the front that says polite. The beekeeper lifts one disc with a flat blade, speaks to the hum the way neighbors do, and withdraws a comb as if invited. Honey carries time, and a rumor of the sea wax becomes lampwick memory, and seal filler dead bees return to soil that finds them honorable. The keeper replaces the disc, smears a fingertip of clay where a crack pretended not to be, and lowers a stone lid against afternoon mischief. Grapes learn their trellis by late morning. Vines run on posts, and crosspieces set by a carpenter who believes in repetition. Leaves scroll and make shade for small stones who approve. In the yard, the stomping vat waits, low, wide, its inner wall rubbed smooth by many good yearnings. When harvest comes, feet will wash and sing and rise and fall until must finds the chute and a jar's mouth receives it. Today a cooper checks hoops with a mallet and listens for the ring that tells of tightness without pride. He weights a stave, bends it against a form, and straps it so it will remember agreement later without argument. Goats patrol the rough edges where vines choose not to be. A boy, whose job is to be fond of goats without encouraging their worst ideas, carries a sling with smooth stones he seldom throws. He keeps to the shade of the terrace wall and practices the art of looking without scaring. His grandmother dries figs on a reed mat and turns each with 2 fingers so sun will not make favorites. Flies receive a fan woven for their education. A jar of salted olives sits open for anyone who has earned the right by honest work or honest patience. Midday lowers itself into the press house like a senior relative who knows where the cup lives. The last mat gives up its oil. The screw rests with the modest self-satisfaction of having done exactly what was asked. The spout, wiped clean with a cloth that has learned not to shed, makes its final thread. Amphorae swallow and swallow to the line. A stopper, pre-drilled with a little hole, receives a snug cord. The cord ties in a loop that opens before it argues. The loop receives a pellet, and the pellet takes a sprig from a ring. The scribe warms the seal between his fingers, so clay will not crack its good intentions. The impression sits handsome and quiet. Afternoon wind lifts its moderate voice and keeps the threshing floor company. Someone tosses chaff and grain with a wooden fork, and the lighter part decides to move on. The heavier stays, because heavy often means useful. A measure finds its cup and rounds it with a reed. The measure is poured into a sack that wears a line of stitches like a smile. A girl carries a sack on her hip and learns the angle that persuades weight to be reasonable. The dog does not chase the chaff. He has been taught to admire the way it makes air visible. Evening checks the terraces and does not find complaint. Walls shadow their own feet. The path shows where steps today chose to become tomorrow's habit. A man kneels to feel a rock that might one day argue its way out of place. He persuades it to stay with a tap and a wedge. A woman bridges a gap in the rill with a shard. Her shard knows the new job as honorable as the old. A child curls in the lee of a pithos and falls asleep listening to oil settle. This is a thing that makes no noise, but the child hears it anyway. Night brings lamps to the press house and stars to the terraces. The beam, relieved, stands straight again like a thing that knows dawn will ask, and it will answer. Nets, folded, look like the idea of patience. Bees murmur differently in the dark, less busy, more certain. Amphorae breathe through stoppers and behave like well-brought-up guests. A fox moves at the field's edge and apologizes to nobody. The gate to the yard is tied with a knot that has served for 3 generations. The screw calls, the rope rests, the press forgets bragging, because it never learned how. If sleep arrives, let it. Terraces will keep soil beams, will keep their memory mats, will keep their weave oil, will keep its level seals, will keep their sprigs hives, will keep their hum rules, will keep their intentions jars, will keep their core wind will. Keep its appointment. A hillside is a method that does not need applause. Pocket pictures to carry forward. Net spread under silver green leaves, padded poles tapping branches that agree to let go a screw descending into mats, and a thin thread of oil, choosing clarity, a settling pan with a ladle. Teaching patience amphora necks with capacity lines, and little clay stoppers wearing cords, a wax tablet with ill names, and a sun-warmed surface around threshing floor waiting for wind, a wooden sluice gate, sliding into stone. Slots clay tube hives, stacked like sleeping fruits, a coopers who bringing true figs, turned with 2 fingers on a reed mat, a seal pellet warming under a thumb before it takes the ring. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place in the slow arithmetic of terraces, in the press that turns fruit into fuel, in small instruments that make harvest a habit. The 9th part. A house is a square of patience open to the sky. The courtyard holds a tree that remembers afternoon shade, a cistern mouth sits under a stone lid that fits like a promise, a ring by the door learns everyone's weight. Floors in the rooms are hard and honest thresholds ask you to lift your feet and remember where you are. The day begins with sweeping. A reed broom persuades dust into a pan that does not argue. Water from a jar weights the stones, just enough to make the morning smell like clean clay. Bread begins in a low trough, worn to the shape of hands. From a chest comes a measure of flour, sifted through a frame whose mesh has been taught not to favor. At a side table, a jar holding yesterday's leaven wakes with a stir. It smells like discipline and kindness. Salt pinched, not poured, tells the loaf to have an opinion. A shoulder leans, a fist folds, the heel of a palm declares order. Dough rests under a cloth that once lived as a sail edge and still believes in wind. A fire is banked in a clay oven, embers are raked with a hook that knows where heat hides. When the dough remembers itself, it is shaped with wet fingers, pricked so it will not swell without thinking, and slid in on a wooden peel that has learned to be brave. In the shade of the colonnade, wool becomes thread and thread becomes cloth. The warp-weighted loom stands like a gentle ladder against the wall, a row of clay weights Svendone's pulls, the warp straight with the moderate stubbornness of gravity. A heddle rod separates odds from evens, a shed rod makes a path for the shuttle, a beater smoothed by years taps weft into the habit of belonging. The spindle turns with a palm that means its whirl is baked clay the size of a plum. Carders comb wool until it remembers clouds, then twist degrees to live along a single line. Silence is not required, the loom like singing. Dye waits in pots that do not hurry. Madder roots have bled their red into a bath that accepts it world, gives it yellow. Sunlight woad, or indigo asks for time and answers with blue. Alum from a far island makes colours learn loyalty. A skein is dipped, lifted. Squeeze the rope over the courtyard spans, becomes a gallery of quiet weather. Drops fall and find the dust shadows of skein sway and sketch an alphabet. No one needs to read to understand. A cat decides a warm coil of undyed yarn is preferable to philosophy and sleeps accordingly. Near the door, jars speak of water with modest authority. Hydrie a 3-handled and confident weight on a low bench, a girl settles one against her hip, then lifts it to her head with 2 competent hands. The well rope runs over a smooth stone that forgives friction, a bucket with a little lip pays water into the jar, so it will not scald. In the cool corner, large pithoys sunk to their shoulders keep the day's supply from becoming a story. A ladle has its hook, a cup sits upside down, because it respects the idea of clean. On the wall, a chalk mark shows where enough lives when you are not looking. Light here is an instrument, not a mood. Clay lamps with spouts live in niches. The one nearest the loom burns olive oil that forgives inattention. A wick is trimmed with a bit of bronze that never learned to be proud. Smoke writes a soft crescent above the niche and stops because the wick received its haircut. At dusk, 2 lamps are lit. one by the hearth, one at the threshold. Their flames are twins who prefer an early bedtime. A child learns to carry a lamp by holding the handle as if it were a sleeping bird. Tools live where their hands remember. A chest against the wall holds needles, and a bone case awls and chisels hang by shape on pegs. A small bronze key, clever and shy, knows the lock on the grain store. You lift, you turn, you ask, and it agrees. On the low table, a wax tablet keeps today's list, a figure for oil, a note about a cracked jug, a name for the woman who promised to bring fig cuttings next week. The stylus writes, flips, and smooths the smooth field, welcomes another thought without remembering the last too loudly. Grinding is the sound of morning. A saddle quern, lower stone resting. Upper stone obedient, makes grain into something people can persuade into bread and porridge. The hand that moves the upper stone learns the circle and the press together. It rests every few minutes because hands are not mills, and no one pretends otherwise. The flour gathered at the lip is lifted with a wooden scoop and breathes a small cloud that makes the kitchen smell breakfast before breakfast exists. Later, a mortar will hold garlic and salt. The pestle will become a drum that teaches flavor to be awake. Clothes are a gentle argument between shape and movement. A tunic cut to let shoulders forget themselves, a belt tied in a knot that opens before it argues. Sandals that learn the city but have sloped feet in their hearts. A woman hems a sleeve with stitches so even you can count them without checking. A man replaces the thong in a sandal by wetting the leather so it will accept reasoning. Hooks of olive wood keep strings from losing the debate with gravity. A chest is closed with a cord and sealed with a pallet of clay that accepts a ring's simple emblem, a sprig, a fish, and goes asleep trustworthy. Children build the day's smaller geography. Knuckle bones click in a pattern that is half rules, half laughter. A spinning top finds the center of the earth, then pretends to be surprised. A reed flute tries 3 notes and decides the second is its friend. On a flat stone, a counting board with pebbles keeps score for a game that looks like taxes but is not. A grandmother flicks a pebble into the next groove and smiles because numbers have behaved. A dog listens for bread scraps with both ears and learns the meaning of later, which he forgets immediately. Fullers come in the afternoon like quiet weather. Cloth, new and faintly boastful, goes into a trough with warm water, and clay that remembers how to remove grease feet or padded hands persuade fibers to agree with neighbors. The cloth is stretched on a frame and combed. A brush of teasel heads teaches nap to lie down like a polite guest. When it dries, a stamp marks whose work this was not for glory, so that if the cloth sags, the right person can fix their method. A line of garments on pegs is a family that says nothing and tells you everything. At the hearth, the lid comes off the pot as if yielding to a friend. Lentils have learned softness, onions have become sweet, a handful of herbs time. Savory remind the house which hill it lives on. Bread thumps out of the oven into a folded cloth. Its crust crackles, a story about heat meeting water and deciding to get along. A wedge of cheese nods. Yes, olives agree to be the salt. The world needs a drizzle of oil on everything, like a benediction that does not pretend to be important. Before anyone eats, a small piece of bread travels to the hard stone and rests there until it forgets it was an offering. Evening makes room speak more quietly. The loom gets its cover, the spindle finds its notched dies. Sleep under lids, lamps are trimmed again. The door bar lowers with a sound the house has known since it learned to be a house. On the roof, a jar of water calls in air that has forgiven. The afternoon stars find their places without ceremony. A mother checks a knot on a child's hair. A father lifts a jar to feel how much oil believes in tomorrow. A neighbor knocks with a fingernail because a fingernail satisfies the idea of knocking. A story begins that has been told before and learns one new line just to keep itself honest. Night asks nothing difficult. The cistern breathes, the pithoi give back coolness like old friends. The ring by the door forgets the last hand and prepares for the next. The key sleeps under the pillow where no one will ask it to dream. Outside, a street remembers feet. A cat edits the map of mice with professionalism. A breeze tests a shutter and agrees to come back when invited. A lamp burns down to a patient thumb of flames. Someone pinches it with wetted fingers and it obeys without offense. If sleep arrives, let it. Loaves will keep their crumb looms, will keep their tension dies, will keep their temper jars, will keep their level lamps, will keep their wick keys, will keep their trick pegs, will keep their shape stories, will keep their pace. A house is a workshop of quiet procedures. It needs no speeches, only hands. Pocket pictures to carry forward. Appeal sliding a pricked loaf into clay heat, a row of clay loom weights, making warp behave a spindle whirl turning like a thought, dyed skeins, dripping from a courtyard span, a hydria lifted to a head with practical grace, a lamp's wick trimmed with a bronze pick, a wax tablet smoothed by the flat end of a stylus, a saddle-querned circle of flour, like a new moon accounting board, with 5 pebbles in the 3rd groove a cloth, stretched on a tenter, combed with teasel a chest, cord sealed with a tiny sprig, a door bar dropped into sockets that know its name. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place at the hearth and the loom, in the grammar of daily things that never think to shout. The 10th part. A workshop is a square of time with tools arranged like a sentence that already knows how to end. In the potter's shed, morning light falls across a wheel whose shallow dish remembers 1,000 circles. The kick wheel turns because a heel keeps a quiet promise, clay climbs because a wet hand invites it. A thumb steadies the lip to fingers teach thickness to be the same all the way around. Slip runs where it must and nowhere else. A wire waits across the pegs to persuade form from earth without any insult at all. Nearby the clay table holds coils like sleeping snakes. A child learns to join them by scoring lines with a comb and painting slip between like courtesy. Before friendship the seam disappears under a steady palm. Handles, cut and breathed on, take their curve from a wrist that trusts muscle memory more than drama. A stamp that knows its little emblem grape. Dolphin. Sprig rests on a tray until damp clay admits it. The potter prints the mark not to boast, but to remember the shop when pots begin to travel. In the yard, the kill squats like a patient dog with a hollow belly. Its lower chamber holds the fire, its upper chamber holds the day's ambition. Shelves with spaces stack bowls and jars into air that will learn to glow. The stoke hole mouth wears soot like a craftsman's apron. The chimney knows which way the wind explained itself last week. A man feeds the fire with brushwood and seasoned sticks and listens to the draft the way a flutist listens to breath. At the spy hole, a shard held like a coin changes colour along an inside edge when the edge says nearly. The stoker leans, and the kill accepts persuasion like an old friend who does not need a loud voice. Glaze is not magic, it is recipe and weather. Ash sifted fine, ground with sand and the memory of salt, thinned with water that remembers the stream above town. A bowl dips through the glaze like a fish through shade and comes up shining with promise, and very little proof waits for heat. On a bench, a brush of soft hair paints and even band another brush, shorter, writes a small wave around a shoulder. There are patterns that make buyers smile and patterns that make them nod and pay. The shop knows the difference and refuses to be irritated by either. Toward the square, benches of planks face open ground where the market finds shape. The agoranomos, the market keeper, arrives with a chest whose trays hold brass weights, all cousins. He sets out the pound, the half, the quarter, the eighth, each with edges that have learned not to wear fast. He checks a vendor's steel yard under a shade awning. Hook, beam, notches, counterweight shaped like a small pear. He slides the weight along, hears the whisper when balance declares itself, and smiles because the notch is honest. A little lead tag, stamped with the city's emblem and a year sign, hangs on the beam to say someone paid attention. Measures stand like polite barrels beside the olive cellar. Each dry measure has a rim and a handle. Its inside scrapes smooth, so flour will not cling to pride. The inspector fills one, scrapes level with a reed, and pours into a sack that has a mark on it from last week's thread. For oil, a narrow-necked jug with a vacant, upright patience repeats its work. The spout pours, a last drop hangs, then obeys a fingertip back into the jug. The seller ties each stopper with a loop that opens before it argues. The loop takes a pellet, the pellet takes a seal. The beer presses a nail mark into the clay beside the seal, not to break it, but to own the memory of the day. Coins move across wood with manners. A banker sits with a box, that has little nests, 4 discs of silver, and bronze. His touch weighs more accurately than words can pretend. A traveling merchant offers a coin from a place where dolphins swim the other way. The banker tests it on a touchstone, the streak speaking of alloy, without raising its voice. He notes a small fee in a wax tablet, flips the tablet, smooths the old line with the flat end of the stylus, and writes a new one the way a path writes itself, by being walked. At the stall for linen, a yardstick cut to a forearm, plus a handshake keeps peace between cloth and coin. The stick has a bronze cap on each end, against the teeth of time along one edge. Shallow cuts count quietly along the other. A finger's width keeps allowance for seams. The seller and beer pull the cloth to a line between 2 pegs, not to trick each other, but to teach fabric to lie straight when virtue is measured. A seal slice of wax, warm from a palm, captures a thread from both parties and takes a mark they can both like. Farther down, a brazier smith runs a file along the edge of a new hinge until it behaves on both sides of the argument. A small balance hangs from a peg. He weighs a handful of rivets against a weight shaped like a lion, or a potato, or a proverb the pan answers, and the customer understands the part of fairness that can be made of metal. A boy pumps the bellows with a steady arm. The charcoal breathes a bar, whispers toward orange, with no need to show off. The smith lifts the bar with tongues that have learned not to feel insulted by heat. Leather speaks in loops and holes and straps. The sandal maker fits a sole against a foot. He marks the line with a bone awl and cuts with a knife that has views but never shouts. Thongs soften in water and then learn their knot around an ankle. A punch goes through with soft stubbornness. A pebble sits behind to say enough to the steel. A jar of tallow persuades edges to stop thinking about mischief. When the customer stands, the fraud decides not to argue, and the customer smiles because motion has become quieter. The fishmonger arranges silver shapes on a bed of reeds and keeps a bowl of water to flick across gills that look their best when they admit being recent. A scale hangs under the awning. Weights sit where fingers can find them without looking. The monger wipes the knife between cuts, not for ceremony, but for reason. He wraps a fish in a sheet of reed and ties with a twist of bark that opens without swearing. No one in the square is important enough to ignore a sweep of the broom. And the fishmonger sweeps because he will see tomorrow and wants tomorrow to be pleased to see him. By noon, the kin's bricks glow a patient plum. The stoker makes small decisions, each the size of a breath. He closes the damper a hair. The draft deepens. The fire finds its lower voice. In the square, the agronomos checks 3 more balances and fails to find a lie worth mentioning. He sits on a bench and eats bread folded around olives and goat cheese, and looks at the line of shade creeping across the stones like a timetable. No one wrote down, but everybody obeys. A dog waiting 4 bread naps through the concept of fairness and dreams of sausages neither promised nor delivered. Afternoon brings cooling and counting. The kill slumps toward quiet. The spy hole shard says now, then wait, then now, and the stoker wedges the fire mouth with a brick and goes to drink water as if the water were his equal. In the potter's shed, shells accept bowls that did what they were told, plaster that did not, and are therefore teaching tools. The potter taps a rim with a fingernail. The ring is a coin of sound. He smiles and writes a small mark on a shard for a glaze that behaved, and an X where it forgot the point. In the square, the banker closes the box and ties it with a loop that opens before it argues. He seals it with wax and a ring and does not sigh. Evening leans a blue elbow on the roofs. The market unbuilds itself without complaint. Benches tip. Scales hang by their cords. Awnings fold into bundles that smell of sun. The agronomos counts the weights back into their trays and runs a hand over each recess to feel that it is not empty. He locks the chest and ties the hasp with a cord and clay pellet. The pellet takes the city's emblem again and goes to sleep. The potter opens the kin's mouth, and the soft breath that comes out smells like earth that agreed to change. Pots clink as they find the basket angle. They prefer a sound like polite coins. A boy watches through the gloaming the way a puppy watches competence. Night in the workshop and square is not the absence of work, it is work that has agreed to sit. The wheel dries, no longer turning, the stamp rests with its face up, so it will not learn a warp. The glaze bucket lives under a cloth that keeps the idea of dust away. In the square, a stray lamp marks a door, a late beer hurries, but not enough to disturb stones. A watchman walks with a staff that taps a small rhythm. The chest of weights sits under a counter and listens to the quiet the way wise metal does. The kill calls like a large cat deciding not to move. The town sleeps because instruments are where they belong. If sleep arrives, let it. Wheels will keep their circle kins, will keep their heat folded glazes, will keep their secrets weights, will keep their numbers measures, will keep their level touchstones, will keep their truth seals, will keep their marks loops, will keep their promise. Markets are conversations between tools and trust, pocket pictures to carry forward. A heel turning of wheel and clay rising with humility, a wire parting a bowl without tears, a kill spy whole shard, shading from straw to a honey, while a breath decides a glazed line around a shoulder. Drawn steady and thin, a chest of weights with trays that remember each cousin, a steel yard's pear-shaped weight, settling into balance, a measure scraped level with a reader touchstone streak, saying what alloy met a yardstick. With bronze capped ends keeping peace, a sealed cord with a fingernail memory beside the ring, a hinge smoothed until it forgives, a sandal thong agreeing with an ankle, a broom moving fish scales away from tomorrow. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place among wheels and weights, in the grammar of honest measures and clay that learned how to listen. The 11th part. A harbour is a promise written in stone and rope. The mole reaches into the water like a careful arm, its back is rubble and lime that learn to harden even where waves gossip. Along the quay, rings sit in granite blocks as a heighter hand remembers without thinking. Their rims shine where rope has practiced courtesy 4 years. Between rings, wooden fenders hang, stuffed with brush and old rope, so holes will meet the city kindly. At dawn the water is glass with ideas. A land breeze slides outward, the last lamps on the mole finish their small shift. A fisherman raises a hand to a keeper at the beacon brazier. The keeper returns the gesture with tongs that smell like pine pitch. Near the slipway, a shipwright shed opens its spine of rafters. Planks lean like well-behaved books, adds his rest on their bellies, and auger waits with a smile that has done nothing wrong. The hull on the stocks is a grammar of curves. Ribs rise from the keel like fingers learning to count each rib. Is sprung to its station with wedges that will go home when their lesson is over. Planks lie edge to edge in a language older than ink. Mortises admit their tenons with a dignity that needs no speech. Little pegs persuade the marriage. A shipwright strikes a seam with a caulking iron. The linen in the seam receives pitch. The pitch receives a sheen from the iron. The seam forgets the idea of gaps. He checks fairness by eye, and a baton light falls in a thin ribbon along the side, and the ribbon does not stutter. At the bow, a knee of oak convinces geometry to be brave. A stem post meets keel with treenails that consider themselves the quietest kind of hero. Up on a trestle, a mast lies under a shaving that curls like a sleeping fish. To men draw blades along its length until the taper admits the sky's opinion. A third ladles warm oil and rubs in circles until water will prefer to slide. The yard square and unassuming hums against the palm. When tapped, that hum is the sound a sail believes. Beside the shed, a pot simmers pitch with a memory of resin and tallow. The smell is the harbour's hymn. A boy brings a bundle of old rope. For oakum, he teases fibres apart with a spike whose job it is to look mean and be gentle. A cooper rolls to jars downboard to the gangplank. The jars stop where the rope fender tells them their place. On a chalked plank, a foreman marks the day's holes with a line that wants to be true, the auger proves it. Along the quay, a merchant hole sleeps against rings, while stevedores teach weight to behave. Inside the hold, brushwood dunnage makes a springy bed amphory descend in pairs with a sling and find their sockets like chess pieces, remembering diagonal rules. The stopper cords receive a last tug, seals keep their little animals, a tallyman notes oil, wine, fish sauce from 3 capes and 1 island. His tablet wears shallow grooves for columns, his stylus whispers a soft arithmetic. Customs works in courtesies. A steel yard hangs in the shade, the counterweight moves along the beam until the notch agrees. An inspector lifts a stopper with a hook, smells, and returns it without creating excitement. A drop spills on the lip, a finger persuades it back inside. The inspector marks the cord with a twist of colored thread. The thread announces, to whoever needs to know, that duty and attention are acquainted. Ropes own the day as much as water. Hawsers lie in Flemish coils that do not argue with feet. A mariner with a palm and needle splices an eye, tucking strands so they lie like a braid that forgot vanity. A line runs through a block, the sheave turns, someone nods at the pitch of the creek, because that pitch means what it ought. Near the prow, a windlass with crossbars waits 4 hands to take turns without proving anything. Anchor stock and fluke sit on the mole, a lesson in leverage. Their lead faces keep a memory of rocks they will refuse to meet again. Sail lives folded under a cover that respects salt. It is broadcloth stitched by a mind that believes in straight. The bolt rope binds edges, small reef points hang like commas for sentences the weather may want to shorten. To women on a bench mend with palm and wax thread their thimbles, know where to be firm. They talk about a nephew's promise to write from Massalia. The sail listens, indifferent, unloyal. Midday moves sand down into water. A boat from the islands comes in under a low square of canvas. Brails gathered to cool the wine's ambition. The helmsman's hand rests on a tiller that takes ideas as suggestions, not insults. A man at the bow stands with a lead line knots ride within his palms. Shore grammar. The lead kisses water and tells depth the way friends report good news. Quietly. 5, he says, and then 4. The helmsman nods. The ring on the next stone block learns a new rope. On shore the chamlery smells like tar and a well-kept promise. Shells carry blocks in families tiny, middling, and a fat uncle for bad weather. Needles, fids, marlins pikes, sail palms, corking irons, scrapers, hooks each hangs by shape under labels no one needs to read. The chandler measures a length of line with a stick whose cuts admit they are not inches or cubits, but something that never starts a fight. He ties the bundle with a loop that opens before it argues and sets the price on a wax tablet where prices sleep like animals that will wake polite. Water belongs to more than ships. At the fish stairs, a runlet of sea laps into stone troughs where the days catch stays honest. A woman buys a mullet with eyes that still know what eyes are for. She salts it from a jar, wraps it in a leaf, and ties with a thread of reed. At the fountain, Amphrey sinks shoulder deep into sand to borrow coolness. The sand is always in the mood to help. A child carries a cup to a sailor and returns with a story about a rope he is proud to understand halfway. Afternoon is 4 tests. The new hull refuses to leak where it might have. The shipwright's watch seems, after first wetting, pitch stays black, and loyal water chooses to be elsewhere. Oars lie along the deck, just a few, for harbour work, and their looms remember being trees. The mast steps into its partner with a sound like someone making up after a sensible disagreement. Rigging tar bites into threads and releases a slow kindness on the hands that work it. By the slipway, a cart slows and someone wedges a wheel wedges a patient friends of gravity. Toward evening, loading finishes with the etiquette of baskets, a crate of figs, a bundle of textiles, a basket of little lamps in straw, a jar of cured olives. The hold becomes a city's backward pocket. The master signs with a seal, and a nod the merchant signs with a seal, and a shrug the tallyman signs with a seal, and the relief of someone whose columns add, without being dramatic. The harbour clerk chalks a board that will be wiped by tomorrow's salt and replaced by tomorrow's chalk. The beacon keeper lays fresh wood in the brazier and does not light it yet. A breeze turns its shirt sleeve into a compass and votes for later. Children count dolphins that escort the island boat. If those greybacks were not simply waves with a memory of joy. On the mole's edge, an old net dries across pegs, patched more times than anyone could count if anyone tried, which no one does. A gull walks as if he founded the place, which he did not. But there is no harm in letting him think so. Night accepts the harbour into its pocket. The mole lights show their small carriage ropes darkened to lines drawn with a soft pencil. The rings call from their day of handshakes. A watch speaks once, and then keeps the rest of the night's side of the bargain. In the hold, Amphrey dream in their lattice, each seal keeps its sprig, each cord keeps its loop. Water remembers the day and forgives it. A cat on a coil of hawser studies the star that repeats itself in a puddle and decides both are edible. Which is wrong but admirable. If sleep arrives, let it. Moles will keep their backs rings, will keep their round seams, will keep their pitch yards, will keep their humbrails, will keep their commas windlasses, will keep their turns lead lines, will keep their knots blocks, will keep their family voices dunnage, will keep its spring. Harbours are patience arranged into stone, rope, wood, and the knowledge of where to set weight. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A ring bright where rope polished it, a corking iron laying a line that forgets to leak, a mast rubbed to a taper, under a ribbon of shaving, a windlass crossbar with 4 hands and no speeches, a lead line rising with waters, quiet number, a steelyards pair settling into a notch, a brushwood bed receiving Amphrey to buy 2, a seal pellet with a dolphin pressed true, a Flemish coil that does not trip feet, a beacon brazier, waiting for the wind to say now. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place at the quay and the slipway, in the grammar of rings and ropes that make arrivals and departures gentle. The 12th part. A sanctuary learns the shape of attention. Cypress and stone share the slope, a precinct wall walks a calm line around them both. The gate is 2 posts, and the lintel that forgot how to hurry. Inside, a court of packed earth remembers sandals, a path of flat slabs persuades ankles to forgive any argument with small stones. The altar stands a little off-center, not to be interesting, but because the wind prefers to pass on one side. Ash from any days lives there, sifted by a hand that knows how to separate coal from the lesson it still holds. Morning moves like a careful broom across the flagstones. A keeper draws water from a cistern whose throat likes farrels of bronze. The rope runs over a stone that is smooth because it refuses to scratch. He waits the court, so dust will decline to speak today. A clay brazier receives 3 chips of resin. They soften into scent without ambition. From a cupboard, a small jug, the oinicho comes out, clean and sensible. Beside it, a shallow libation bowl, the fioli waits in the shade. A sprig lies on the step, neither a rule nor a symbol, only a gesture that many hands have light. Votive gifts live along the colonnade in a grammar of gratitude. There are terracotta limbs that say this leg remembered walking again, bronze eyes that say this sight returned, and little clay ships that say the harbour agreed to be kind. Each offering hangs or stands with a tag of cord, no name that can be read here, only the fact that someone counted a grace and wished to anchor it. Reeds dried last spring hold their circles even now. A small plaque carries a scratched fish that might be a fish or a wish. The keeper dusts them with a feather brush that persuades without scolding. At the altar, a rake of bronze levels ash the way a hand smooths a child's hair. Yesterday's coals find their place, small fresh chips build a nest, a fire wakes like someone who has slept well. The keeper lifts the fioli, pours a little wine, and gives the ground what it will not miss. He crosses to the lustral basin, a simple stone bowl with water that has heard honest words. A visitor dips a hand and touches brow and wrist, water calls, and the day proceeds without drama. Nothing here is in a hurry, not even devotion. On the temple step, a musician tunes a kithara. The tortoise shell long ago became wood. The arms rise and hold a crossbar where pegs turn with a dry murmur. Strings pull against a bridge that trusts the top. He plucks and listens, then places a wedge under a string to change its mind. Near him, another player slices a reed for an aloes. He measures by eye, cuts a slit, and binds with thread, so the reed will remember what sharpness is for, also what kindness is for. Their notes test the air the way a mason taps a stone, never loudly, always for truth. By late morning, the chorus gathers under a painted portico. Tunics are clean and simple belts know their knots. Masks rest on a bench, pale as the inside of a fig before it meets sun. Each mask hangs by a little hook that has done this 4 years. The chorus leader points with a roll of papyrus, the lines memorized. The roll held because hands like certainty. A Corrego's patron for the season stands with a wreath he refuses to wear. It sits on the post instead, pledging nothing except tomorrow's patience. Down the slope, the theatre holds its curve, like a seashell that learned geometry. Stone seats step the hillside in lines. You can count, if you like counting. The lowest row touches the orchestra circle, packed and rubbed until dusk gave up. In the center, a slight rise, the thymel keeps the circle from forgetting itself. A stage building scheme offers doors and a painted skin that does not insist upon being real. In a corner, a water clock clepsydra drips at a tempo that minds the chorus but never bosses it. A stagehand checks the flow and smiles because it has chosen a good mood. The day's rehearsal, in a ladder with many dependable rungs. The aulos hums a pitch, the kithara agrees, voices join in unison, and then into familiar lines. A child, forbiddance to loud joy, not to joy, counts beats with a twig against his knee. The chorus steps right, then left, then right, then turns with a softness the sand approves. Their sandals speak a small, dry grammar that keeps time and never argues. The leader marks a rest with a hand that says breathe here, and 30 chests appreciate the permission. Temple keepers and chorus teach each other without trying. A girl fetches water for both, she carries the hydria, as if it were the shyest member of the cast. The keeper lends a lamp wick to fix a fray, the chorus leaves a basket of figs that require nothing but being noticed. A mason arrives to check a crack step. He wedges and taps and leans in to hear the stones reply. When it says enough, he stops. A boy runs a broom along the orchestra's edge and finds 3 pebbles that had wished to become obstacles. He hands them to a pocket that understands their future as ballast. Afternoon finds quiet work behind the scene. A painter refreshes a door panel with a thin wash of earth color. He adds a shadow where a lintel would be if this were a house that chose to be real. He does not pursue realism, he pursues kindness to distance. In the props corner, a basket of reeds waits, some of laurel, some of wool. A small jar of resin holds the idea of incense for a moment later. A long robe is hung from a peg, and the peg shows where to aim a hand when nerves want to wander. On a shelf, 2 rolled backdrops rest like scrolls of weather. The precinct receives visitors with equal measures of space and shade. A mother leads a child past the votives and names nothing aloud. The child understands more than his face admits. A man kneels, not to beg, only to improve how his thoughts are arranged when he rises. Ash clings to his knee, he brushes it away without apology. At the gate, a pair of travelers leave small coins in a tray because roads, like gods, benefit from maintenance. The tray rings once, and then does not ring again until it likes the idea. Evening lends the first performance a low kindness. Masks take their hooks faces, meet them halfway, voices warm to unison, bread warming in a clay oven. The sun lowers behind the ridge and hands the bowl of air to the first lamps, which accept without fanfare. Someone checks the clepsydra. Its drip says enough for this scene. In the orchestra, the chorus takes its place. Left foot a half sandals length behind right, not from law but from habit. The aulos begins, the kithara replies, and the theatre becomes a body that breathes through many chests. Night carries sound the way water carries a lantern stripe, gently farther than you think. Lines tell of old kings who learned arithmetic the hard way. The chorus reminds them that measures exist for reason. The audience quietly agrees. Up on the precinct wall, a little wine plays the cypress like a soft broom through hair. Nothing is argued to long. The altar ash thins to a glow and then remembers to be dark. The gate gives back the last sandals and goes to being a gate again. If sleep arrives, let it. Altars will keep their ash votives, will keep their thanks masks, will keep their hook strings, will keep their pitch reeds, will keep their temper steps, will keep their circle water clocks, will keep their drip doors, will keep their paint wedges, will keep their place. Sanctuaries are schedules for attention, theatres are rooms for breath. Both prefer kindness to noise. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A rake smoothing altar ash into a patient plane, a fiali pouring just enough bronze eyes, lined on a shelf, Like quiet witnesses, a kithara peg turning with a dry murmur, a reed bound for an aloes, with thread a mask pail on its hook. Ready without hunger the thymos slight rise in the orchestra, a clepsydra marking time with water's soft syllable, a mason's wedge listening for enough, a painted door refreshed. Shadow added for distance, a tray ringing once at the gate. If sleep arrives, let it. Greece keeps your place under cypress and stone, in the calendars of altars and choruses that turn thought into breath, and then into rest. The 13th part. A road is a line of modest promises, stitched through hills and fields. It does not shout, it chooses the firm ground where carts will not sulk, lives a little in the middle so rain will excuse itself into ditches, and takes the long way around a stubborn rock, because patience is cheaper than pride. Border stones stand knee-high at the edges, whitewashed in weather that forgives a traveller's foot, finds the hardened band of wheel-worn gravel, the way a hand finds the familiar rim of a cup, where the ground softens, brushwood and small stone make a mattress, where the slope grows bold. Steps admit that honesty is safer than speed. At dawn the milepost round and blunt as a thoughtful thumb shares the news it always shares. How far the last town is, when measured by someone who did it before you. Its letters learn to fade gracefully, its height learned to catch the light. A boy touches it, as if the stone might notice, then walks on with a staff, whose ferrule keeps the idea of distance from arguing with dirt. The road ties small places together. A threshing floor near olives, a spring under rock, a shrine with a ribbon that remembers rain, a farm gate, whose hinge understands its job. Bridges are conversations between shore and shore. The small ones cross the impatient streams with three short arches and cutwaters that lean into current like soft-shouldered friends. Their parapets sit at elbow height, so a jar can rest. The stones underfoot are laid tight with a whisper line of morse where water sometimes thinks aloud. Larger spans carry a wagon without making a speech about it. A mason runs his palm across the underarch before he leaves and feels the geometry nod back. Under the bridge, a boy counts the fish slowly because the water asks for that kind of count. Where river forgets to be small, the ferry remembers how to help. Two rings on posts stand taller than a man and shine where rope has rehearsed its affection. A thick line runs to the far bank and a second to a float midstream that minds the current. The ferryman pushes the pole like a polite argument. The boat answers with a shrug and then consent. Animals load first, so they can change their minds in peace. A woman steadies a hydria with her forearm, while the boat sighs. A man holds a basket of figs close, so sweetness will not wander. A child watches the wake draw a line, and wonders how long lines can be without disturbing anyone. Way stations keep the road's manners alive. A courtyard with 2 trees shows, where shade has taken root. A trough holds water that remembers mountain taste. A stable offers clean straw, and to hooks for tack that prefer company. A farrier keeps a small forge with a coal bed that never grows ambitious. His bellows breathe like a thoughtful animal. The anvil has learned to be patient with opinions. Shoes are measured against hooves that learn the road last season. Nails are driven with a rhythm that sounds like rain answering a roof. A jar of tallow persuades leather to be kind again. Inside the post house, a table remembers many elbows. A clerk, whose shoulders are narrow, but whose lists never are, keeps a wax tablet with grooves for names and destinations. He warms yesterday's lines and smooths them without insulting what they meant. He writes today's routes with a stylus that has accepted responsibility. Seals weight, small pellets of clay, a string, a ring with a sprig that has lived on 3 generations of wages. A courier arrives with a leather case worn to the shape of its tasks. It opens to rolls come out with cords unknotted by respect rather than speed. The clerk nods, presses, ties, and nods again. No one feels the need to be clever about it. On the road, the courier rides as if miles were beads on a string. His horse goes at a trot that chooses not to argue with wind. Saddlebags sit evenly, a strap against the chest reminds the rider how the earth slopes. A waterskin moves once, and then decides it has nothing to prove. When a hill insists on being a hill, the rider dismounts and walks for the horse's socky, not his own. At the brow, A beacon tower low, square, no longer used for alarms, holds a lantern in winter and a flag in summer. Its keeper trims a wick because he believes in being ready even when no one asks. Signs exist without letters. A cairn at a fork leans more to the left. A carved shape points toward a town whose cobbler is famously reasonable. A row of poplars along the horizon tells of a river crossing a dry laid wall ends where the path you want begins. Old cart ruts, parallel and persuasive, show where weight has been content. Shepherds dog the margins with gracious disinterest. Their bells keep time the way a slow hand keeps time on a tabletop. The sun moves the shadows, tell you what hour your stomach already knew. In narrow places, mountain walls step back just enough for friendship. A retaining wall holds the hill. Where it stands, tiny plants learn to live in joints. The road passes under an overhang that remembers winter icicles and summer swallows. A stone-cut gutter pulls meltwater down and out of harm's way. A slate laid across it at intervals makes little bridges 4 feet that prefer dry. When fog comes, it comes like a well-behaved guest, clinging to edges and leaving emptiness clear. If rain comes, the surface takes it calmly. Gravel sighs, mud thinks twice, wheels hesitate and then agree. Tolls are not arguments if everyone knows the ritual. At a narrow bridge, a booth the size of a good cupboard holds 2 chairs and a tally stick. A rope across the way is looped, not tied. The keeper lifts it with 2 fingers and a word that means welcome. A coin clinks, a notch on the stick grows by 1. A little dish of dates loses 2 and does not mind. If a cart is heavy, a second man wedges a wheel while the keeper checks the rim of the coin on a stone, just to be sure the metal did not forget what it is. The rope lowers behind each traveller like a nod that says the road continues. Maps exist as habits. A peddler knows that the fig trees above the ford fruit 2 weeks later than the orchards nearer the sea. A muleteer knows which spring tastes of iron and which of stone. A pilgrim knows how many prayers fit between 2 shrines. Without rushing, distances live in legs, not just in the letters on milestones. From time to time, a traveller scratches a simple mark on a rock to remember that he meant to return from time to time. Someone sees it and feels less alone without knowing why. Evening gathers the road into cooler shapes. Dust drops will sound less like news and more like reassurance. The post house lays the long table with bowls that do not argue about portions. Stew learns to be generous. Bread rehearses being sufficient without boasting. A ladle learns everyone's name by the end of the week. In the stable, a man pulls burrs from a horse's tail with the same attention he would give to a thorn in his own hand. A boy checks the water bucket twice because the first check is for show and the second for horses. In the sleeping room, mats lie in the same piece as last night. A lamp on the shelf keeps a thumb aflame that never intends to be dramatic. Night makes the road a thought instead of a path. Far off, a ferry chain clinks once and then remembers quiet. Nearer by, a fox steps across the packed band in the middle and leaves no complaint behind. A courier sleeps with the leather case under his arm, not for fear, for a habit. The clerk's wax tablet calls and holds today's arithmetic like an honest pond holding sky. The toll rope hangs in a loop that opens before it argues. The mile post shines in the moon enough to be counted if counting brings comfort. If sleep arrives, let it. Camber will keep waters manners ditches, will keep their lanes bridges, will keep their arches ferries, will keep their rings troughs, will keep their levels shoes, will keep their nails seals, will keep their sprigs tally sticks, will keep their notches milestones, will keep their calm idea of here and there. Roads are kindness arranged over distance. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A milepost pale at dawn, wheel ruts black with a little rain, and kind to feet. A 3-arch bridge with cutwaters leaning into current. A fairy rope humming and a ring bright where hands remembered. It a stable trough with the moon inside. A farrier's nail tapped home to the sound of common sense. A clerk smoothing yesterday's wax and writing today without resentment. A toll rope lifted with 2 fingers. A cairn leaning left where the path agrees to split. A beacon tower's lantern trimmed because readiness is a kind of sleep. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place along the long, patient line between one table and the next. between one lamp and the next, where distance is measured in small instruments that do not need applause. The 14th part. Fields keep the shape of patience when hills do not. Dry-laid terraces step the slopes in low, honest walls. Each course of stones leans a little inward, so soil will choose to stay. Between walls, earth lies in long rectangles the sun can read. A path runs along the edges, where sandals do not resent the gradients. A little gutter cut from the upper wall to the lower lets winter water pass like a guest who knows not to stay. In the corner, a cistern mouth with a fitted lid holds last rain, if it were a letter from a friend. Morning begins with baskets and silence. Olives test their weight in a palm. Some shine green and truthful, some have learned purple. Nets spread under trees in slow arcs, the edges tucked around the trunk, so fruit will not decide to seek adventure downhill. Rakes with wooden fingers coax branches to let go. Fruit falls with soft, well-bred sounds. A child is set to chase nothing, to look under leaves, to admire a beetle. Somehow the child finds what adults missed. In another plot, a ladder leans, a man climbs and shakes a bough just enough to make the tree laugh and comply. Sorting is a grammar of trays. Sound fruit goes to oil, bruise to soap, or lamp bird peck to goat. Hands learn to be kind and quick. Olive leaves, sent away by a sieve, tell their own wine story somewhere else. The press yard waits below with its floor of flagstones and a beam across the posts thick as grown men. The beam's far end takes baskets. The near end will receive a stack of weights that argue with gravity and win, because gravity insists on fairness. A boy weights the baskets, so they will learn cooperation. A woman winds the first basket with its long rope like a philosopher paying attention. Crushing begins with a stone wheel that is more tired of metaphors than anyone can know. The axle turns because a donkey has a sense of humor about circles. The olives under the wheel remember to be paced. A scraper gathers paste into a tub, a hand mixes, and the smell of green, peppery light rises. Discs of woven fiber coils, the size of shields, receive the paste in layers. A rod through the center makes each disc obedient. Stack follows stack, the beam lowers. Wedges are removed, weights, stone, lead. A pinion climb onto the hanging arm one by one. Rope groans once, and then decides to sing in a lower key. Oil is not a miracle, it is a patient migration. First comes a cloudy rush that runs into the settling jar, like weather trying to become a story. Then thinner trickles that already believe in clarity. The trough slopes toward a spout that chooses the jar and not the ground. A reed keeps back skins and seeds. In a corner, a pot of hot water waits to persuade the last stubbornness out of fiber discs without scalding them. A basin sits aside to collect the heavy water later. It will find its way to soap or lamp, because nothing here goes unloved long. Nearby, a threshing floor keeps the wine for its friend. Last season's straw has been raked away, the round of hard earth, mixed with chaff and lime and beaten, until it learns smoothness, lies open to the afternoon. A mule's hooves speak in a mild rhythm. A sledge with flint teeth breaks husk from grain. A man sings, so both animals and tall remember elegance. When wind cooperates, a fork lifts the mixture and lets the air make sense of weight. Grain falls where you want, husk drifts where you do not. A woman holds a basket high and pours, the sun becomes a net. Grapes tell a different truth. In a stone vat, feet tread in slow music, hands on the rim, steady balance, laughter is permitted. Splash is not. Juice learns to flow through a spout into a jar that keeps its cool by living shoulder deep in earth. The first juice, the flower runs clear and noble, the pressed juice waits for later stories. Skins and stems settle in a basket press that nods to the olive beam and admits many cousins in technology. A wooden screw turns with a bar and the kind of grunt that never turns into complaint. The muss sleeps under a cloth until the small animals in the air decide to write their long, quiet poem. Storage has an architecture of clay. Pithoi, sunk to the shoulder, keep oil and wine from thinking too much about temperature. Their inside shines from a lining of pitch that smells like forests and discipline. On each neck, a line scratched when the vessel was new, shows where enough lives. Another line, lower, shows where still enough lives when there is less to say. A lid sits with a rope around its waist. A clay pellet holds a ring's memory. Sprig, fish, dolphin, leaf. A ledger on a wax tablet notes what came, and where it went. A hand smooths and writes again, only when both columns convince each other. Water climbs where it must. Terraces drink from channels cut along the upper edge, with little gates made of smooth stones that lift and sit back down without sulking. When a gate opens, a trickle runs along a shallow furrow, talks with a root, and moves on to talk with another. A hoe pulls a little ridge to remind water not to wander. In summer, jars in the shade lend call to the idea of thirst. In winter, the cistern lid carries a stone, because lids, like promises, deserve the weight that keeps them true. Bees keep their own calendar under the slope. Clay hives, long as a forearm and just as stubborn, sit on racks. A woven cap closes each end with respect. The keeper smokes gently, not because he likes power, but because bees like modesty in visitors. A comb, lifted kindly, drips into a pot that once held figs and remembers their goodness. Wax goes to lamp, sweetness goes to bread. The bees go back to their business without discussing poetry. A child is told to stand farther away and does, after a line of argument that pleases no one, including the child. Tools, as always, know where they live. Sickles hang by their wooden throats. On a peg under the eaves, handles of mattocks catch the light along their polished curve. A rake leans with tines down, because tines up is how accidents vote. A broom of twigs stands in the doorway, perfect for sweeping the wedge of chaff that always pretends to be invisible. A ladder is stored flat, not to kink the oil skimmer. A cup with a long lip sits on its hook. The sieve for olives shares a nail with a basket repair kit. Nothing feels alone, nothing is grand. Midday introduces shade as an argument that wins easily. Under a mulberry tree, bread splits along its line. Cheese offers its careful salt. Olives believe in themselves. Figs forgive the sticky fingers they make. A jar of water wears a little skin of cool on the outside. A cup dipped in and poured over the wrists reminds the hands of temples who painted frescoes long ago. Conversation stays near ground level. Weather, stone that moved happily today. A rope that learned cooperation at last. The mule's new shoes. The bee sting that was nobody's fault. Afternoon completes the day's arithmetic. The beam is walked up with wedges, and the lever weights descend and rest where they wait for tomorrow. Fiber discs are rinsed and spread like moons on a low wall. The donkey's sweat is rubbed off with a handful of straw. The wheel track at the threshing floor is swept in a spiral, because spirals please the earth. Grain goes into sacks. A short ladder climbs into the granary, where no mouse is welcomed and every mouse is expected. In the vat corner, a head of foam suggests that yeast is at work, and also happy. A hand draws a finger along the vat's rim and tastes, then nods at a sweetness that will argue into order in its own time. Toward evening, jars receive oil through a funnel that takes its dignity from never spilling. These are amphorae meant to travel, to handles, a sharp foot, a neck that agrees with stoppers. A rolled cork or a wad of linen takes pitch, is tamped, and then tied with a loop that opens before it argues. The pellet receives a seal. A mark on the shoulder reminds everyone what grove this came from. When memory pretends to be tired, the cart that will carry to rows of amphorae is checked. Pins, linchpin, wedge, grease on the axle, the plank that keeps weight from thinking it should break. Two men lift with their knees and what they call good judgment. Night enters without conditions. The terraces set their shoulders to keep soil where it belongs. Through sleep the walls remember hands. The cistern remembers to be cool without being asked. The press yard smells of resin and patience. The pithoi breathe like animals who have adapted to the idea of stillness. A lamp burns on a shelf next to a stylus pressed into wax. A moth tries to understand flame and is persuaded not to. Somewhere a flute tries 3 notes and decides that the second is still its friend. Dogs declare the existence of the moon and go on to other matters. If sleep arrives, let it. Terraces will keep their stone choices. Nets will keep their borders. Baskets will keep their work beams, will keep their hinge discs, will keep their weave ropes, will keep their honesty spouts, will keep their aim jars, will keep Their levels lids will keep their seal ledgers, will keep their calm arithmetic. Fields and presses are machines made of time and care. They need quiet more than applause. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A rake coaxing olives under the green shade, a net tucked around a trunk like a shawl, a beam press stepping down with weights that do not brag, paste spread in woven discs and stacked like moons. The first bright oil ribbon choosing the jar, a threshing floor lifting grain into wind, while chaff writes a light script, bare feet treading grapes in a stone vat, hands on rim. Smiles contained a pitho's neck, with a scratched in a fline, a funnel pouring steady, a seal pellet, with leaf pressed true, a clay hive cap lifted with smoke, that means courtesy, a ledger line smoothed and written again. If sleep arrives, let it. Grease keeps your place among terraces and jars, in the grammar of patient walls and liquids that learn to be clear.